Hi, everyone, and welcome back to day 4 of Emerge Live. My name is Laura Barger, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at the Financial Health Network. Again, if you've stuck with us throughout the week, thank you so much for coming back. If you're just tuning in for the first time, we really appreciate you joining us. If you spent time with us yesterday, you'll know that our sessions focused on the connection between health and financial well-being, which explored topics such as the disproportionate impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on vulnerable communities, the impact and equitable access to healthcare has on the health of underserved populations, and the opportunities for cross-industry collaboration to ensure a more holistic approach to improve both health and financial wellness. I'd encourage you to take a few minutes to explore the session, which was recorded and is now available in our related content section right on this page. Today's theme is rebuilding resilience, and our agenda focuses on the role of various tools, behaviors, and principles that can help vulnerable communities build stable futures and weather financial shocks, including conversations on retirement, insurance, and emergency savings. Before we begin, here are a few tips for today's experience. If you're watching today's live stream from the Emerge Live site, please take a moment to check out the related content that we've highlighted on today's page. It will give you some additional context to some of the topics that we discussed today and a way to follow up for some more information. We've also included a chat function that will be enabled throughout the day. You can see the chat box right here on the Emerge Live page. Feel free to engage in discussion and ask questions throughout the day. Please note that while some sessions might be able to address questions directly, others may not. We'll do our best to answer what we can. Closed captioning is available throughout the week, provided by the World Institute on Disability. Please see the link above the schedule to access this feature. If you're joining us as part of a Financial Health Network member organization, we will be holding exclusive networking opportunities at the end of our programming, both today and tomorrow. To register for a session, please click on the Backstage Access link at the bottom of this page to sign up. And finally, as always, please let us know what you think. You'll find a link to our daily survey just above the schedule on this page. Your feedback is so important to us, and it will continue to help us deliver a great experience to you all. Thank you, as always, to our sponsors who have stepped up to support and encourage these important conversations. Thank you to our diamond sponsors, JPMorgan Chase and Prudential Financial. Our financial health sponsor, the Midlife Foundation. Our gold sponsors, AARP Foundation, BlackRock, PayPal, and Wells Fargo. Our silver sponsors, Bank of America, Intuit, and Fifth Third Bank. Our bronze sponsors, Capital One, Marcus by Goldman Sachs, Members Development Company, the National Credit Union Foundation, and Opportune. Our day begins today with a conversation between Financial Health Network's founder and CEO, Jennifer Tescher, Lisa Marsh Ryerson, president of the AARP Foundation, and Alice Rodriguez, managing director and consumer bank advisor at JPMorgan Chase. Their opening topic today is on the opportunities to protect the economic security of Americans as we age. I sincerely hope that you enjoy the day.
Hi, this is Jennifer Cheshire, President and CEO of the Financial Health Network, and I am so excited to be here today with Lisa Marsh Ryerson, the President of the AARP Foundation, and Alice Rodriguez, a Managing Director and Head of Community and Business Development at JP Morgan Chase. Welcome, ladies.
So good to be with you.
I am so excited. I'm so excited about this session we're doing because today, thanks to all of you, we are launching Financial Health After 50, Rethinking the Golden Years. It's a 6-part video series sponsored by the AARP Foundation in collaboration with JP Morgan Chase. Last year, our team spent a year meeting and following 11 low and moderate income individuals over the age of 50 from across the country. And they were incredibly generous in sharing how they are navigating their financial lives in their older years. Each one of these people that we followed is facing some incredibly difficult challenges, whether it's paying their monthly bills, taking care of family members, navigating multi-generational living, or attempting to prepare for retirement. And those are all made more difficult by larger systemic and societal challenges. And these 11 adults are really just a sample of the 56 million low to moderate income individuals over 50 across the nation who are struggling to get by. And so today we're going to spend some time talking about what we learned from this work and what are some of the positive solutions that we're seeing out there to try to help deal with some of these challenges. But first, I'm going to ask my colleagues behind the scenes to tee up a brief trailer to give you a sneak peek at this video series.
I got sick in 2013.
In order to make sure we save our house, I had to file bankruptcy.
There's no savings. They're lucky if you come out even or even behind a little bit.
I should not have been my age and not known.
And it gets a little scary sometimes. I think, am I going to be able to retire in 2 years?
When it's gone, I want them to be able to stand up. I've been working since I was 16 anyway.
It's rare that we get to hear from people in their own voices. We've gathered a tremendous amount of data about what it's like to grow older in America. We realized that what it was lacking were the stories of how people are making these complicated decisions about their financial lives.
To be able to go out in a qualitative research project and talk to people where they live will help us do a better job to advance solutions that are actually meeting the needs.
The most impactful thing is to go out into the community and ensure that we're helping all people.
So I hope seeing that little clip makes you want to go watch the entire series, which you can access at the bottom of the screen that you're currently watching us on now. But let's get into it a little bit. Lisa, let me turn it over to you. Talk to us a little bit about why this video series. Why was this an important thing to do?
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. So again, so great to be with you and your colleagues at Financial Health Network. And Alice, always a treat to be with you and have the great collaboration and support of all of our colleagues at Chase. For us, investing in this work, Jennifer, was furthering our research work with you and your team, which is always so excellent, really top notch. And we wanted to be able to share the human-centered design nature of the work at AARP Foundation as we're increasing economic opportunity for low-income older adults with others. We also wanted to grow our own understanding. And, you know, so often in this nation, I love the title of the video. We actually do believe that there is this kind of plan that everyone has access to for the golden years, even though we know that life doesn't always go as planned. So I think the power of these stories is the generosity of the sharing and the complicated, really intertwined financial decisions that individuals are making over their lifetime. It's led us to make sharper, keener decisions about the tools and services that we're working on, many of them with Chase.
Excellent. We'll get into that in a minute. I agree, though, that all the data in the world pales in comparison to when you hear real people telling you their real stories. It really does bring it to life. So Alice, talk to us about why this was important for JP Morgan Chase, and how does this fit into your work? I mean, obviously you're serving all different kinds of people of all ages and all different stages of life.
Yeah, so thank you, Jennifer. For us, the point that you just made about hearing directly from the customer or from the consumer was critical. And so, as you know, we have been working at JP Morgan Chase on our financial health agenda, and that's it's about serving a very broad group of sub-segments. And the way we want to, talk to and help our youth or our students is going to be very different on how we need to help older Americans, and particularly given the environment that we're in today. And so we recognize that having a trusted partner like AARP was critical, because obviously they are the experts when it comes to older Americans. And we knew that being able to collaborate on listening firsthand to what our customers and consumers were dealing with would be the best approach to then finding the right solutions for them.
Great. So these videos focus on 6 different themes: living on a fixed income, living in a multi-generational household, caregiving, medical shocks, the reality of retirement, and the last episode, which is really one of my favorites, the advice you would give to your younger self. Let's go back to you, Alice, on this. These are obviously themes and ideas that you all hear every day from your customers and in the communities where you work. What really resonated for you as you were listening to people talk about their lives? And what are the biggest challenges that you really hear from your older customers?
Obviously, I think the video series did a very good job of capturing the essence. But for me, it was about helping older Americans just get very comfortable with a variety of ways that they could bank and they could save that they're not accustomed to. And more importantly, what are the ways that we can help them get to that comfort? And so an example I'll use is, you think about, how our lives have changed, right, since COVID, and the number of people over 50 that had not used their mobile device. Like, although they're on their mobile device quite often, like in 2019, there was a survey that said, 2/3 of them had never used their mobile device to do a financial transaction. And the fact that people weren't allowed to go to banks. There was a stay-at-home, obviously order for everybody. And so I felt the work we did with AARP is, we jumped on, we want to ensure that we could provide, a method of communication that's comfortable, that is, people could feel like, even I can do it kind of thing, was the approach that we took. And I felt that was really important. I felt like it was important to do it in both English and in Spanish, because, we found a very large, Spanish speaking population that was really afraid about what should I do next. So I do think that it has led us to sort of this list of additional things that we need to do that we don't necessarily have readily available, that we've been able to put on our roadmap now.
And that was interesting, Jennifer and Alice, because just as the videos are all about human-centered design and storytelling, in building with Chase curriculum and resources that are now widely available to organizations and individuals who are listening today, both in English and Spanish, we pulled together groups of people across the nation and sort of practice that human-centered design to really, as much as possible, perfect the tools and resources that are up live now on our website in both Spanish and English.
That's terrific. Lisa, talk to us about what you took away from these videos. I know before the show, we were just comparing notes. We both just binge watched them yet again. They're so compelling. What's really resonating for you? You've been in this business now for quite some time, but it sounds like there were some elements that felt, if not new, at least
underscored,
really
right?
Expressed, exactly.
Yeah, you know, one, Jennifer, for me, I'm going to really give right back to you, which is there's a powerful intro, or maybe it's the ending of one of the episodes in my binge watching that I saw again, and I hear you say frequently, and I underscore it, which is that knowing is not enough. You know, that came through in the videos. So you're right, there were powerful reminders. First of all, a reminder that so many older adults are either already living in poverty or right on the verge. They are one financial shock from falling into a low income status. So that was striking. Also, it's that there is this, these are societal issues, but the individuals, whether it's Werner or Corin or Larry or Ronald or Wilson, really any of the 11 individuals who were so generous with us in their storytelling, they did everything right with the resources and information they had, and yet they feel powerfully responsible in some way. So I'm taken again by the fact that we see people's financial struggles as personal failings rather than understanding that poverty really is systemic and is a national illness. And so working with Chase and working with you, Jennifer, we're able to have the information to build ever more effective and powerful tools that will help the individuals who shared their stories with us. But they will not work unless we simultaneously address structures in society.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you emphasized that point, Lisa. For me, watching the videos, I was struck by how getting old in this country, it's no longer a moment of dignity.
Right.
For people. We're really stripping people of their dignity, despite the fact that they're doing everything that they can to live with dignity, to be responsible, to support and be supported by their families. And the sacrifices that they were still making, even at this point in their lives, when they should be able to relax or feel more secure.
Yeah, remember there's a story, Alice and Jennifer, I think it's Corin and Larry, but there's a story of, you know, just sharing, you know, we haven't been away together. And it's a long time ago, like maybe 2005, because there was job loss. We know how hard it is if you've lost a job over 50 to get back into the workforce. And then the job loss, right? One financial shock leads to decision making. It's the connection, the interconnection, a holistic view that we need to take for people.
Right.
Well, you know, one of the things, Jennifer, go ahead, Alice. One of the things just to add to that is that, you know, one of the realizations for us is like, are we doing a good enough job, like to help our bankers and our branches to recognize this and to recognize that people are carrying this shame and they don't need to, like, we're here to help. You know, so what are some of the things that we can power up the bankers with so they can create that environment and culture? And I think, Lisa, some of the work that we did in Harlem at the Center branch, where, you know, we're bringing in older adults and helping them to, obviously this was pre, you know, COVID, but, you know, bringing them in so that they could see, like, look, there's no shame, there's no judgment.
No, that's right.
There's systematic issues. We want to help you. And here's some like tips and tools to do that. And I remember sitting through that session and just seeing people like the anxiety coming down, right? Because they felt like they were in an environment where they could do that.
Yeah, I think you're right. And Jennifer, we wish you would have been with us, but you were certainly there in spirit and intellect, as you often are. We're riding as a team. Yes. But I do think what was so powerful about our experience in Harlem and across the nation when we ran our in-person sessions, coupled with, you know, as I was seeing the video series unfold, is that you combine that with the great work at Financial Health Network, helping us all understand the opportunity for fintech developers, for organizations, and for individuals. That remember, Alice, what we saw and could talk with the participants about is you can come in any time, but there are certain financial transactions that you can make safely using financial technology. And then when you come in, you still come in and we can have a chat. about how you're doing, just so that the bankers can be touching base. It really was so powerful for me that Chase is banking in community, and how helpful that was to see that in Harlem.
So both of you have touched on COVID. These interviews were largely done before COVID. But Alice, you in particular talked about how with shelter in place, technology use became even more important, including for some older Americans who might not have used, let's say, the bank's app before. I do think that we tend to underestimate older Americans and their use of technology. The studies show that actually they are pretty frequent users of technology, and why there are specific reasons why they may choose, at least in the past, pre-COVID, to not use financial technology in particular. We, in addition to all of the work we've been describing today, we also released a report last month with your support and partnership called FinTech Over 50, Designing for Low and Moderate Income Older Adults. And we, again, took a human-centered design approach. We connected directly with older Americans, and we spent time trying to understand their attitudes, their preferences, their abilities around using technology to meet their financial health needs. The report, you can also find that on the same screen that you're watching us on now. And I think it's really interesting, some of the insights that we took away from what people want, what people are challenged by. I wonder, Lisa, Alice, if you'd like to talk a little bit about that from your perspective.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in first, and then Alice has such experience in this space. But, just as we said at the beginning around our video series, where there's such a stereotype about what it is to be retired or how long people are needing or wanting to work, same exists, we learned through research and know with FinTech, and older adults are over it. There is this stigmatizing or stereotyping saying, well, you're older, so you don't know how to use technology. Not so, as your research confirmed again for us, Jennifer, and really wanting to have that regard, that respect, design with their unique needs in mind. And, as long as we're building into the solutions, the coaching and education along the way, there will be, I believe, much more robust adoption. Likely that's occurred already during COVID-19, but I'd be curious, Alice, for your views.
Yeah, I know 100%. And I think that coaching and education is what is critical, Lisa. And I do think that, the PR and communication that we set with AARP once COVID was happening was really important, because it wasn't so much about, again, okay, we're afraid of technology, but it was about making the older American also aware of, unfortunately, when we have these kinds of crises in the country, you also kind of see increased fraud.
That's right.
To make sure that, look, it's, the technology to do your banking is very, very safe. You should feel very comfortable. It's very easy. It's user friendly, etc. However, we also want you to know that, unfortunately, in these times, here are some common, scams or frauds that you might see. And remember that a bank will never, ever, ever threaten you or act with this sense of urgency, asking you to take action or ask you to provide any personal information. And I don't know, I felt like really proud about that, Lisa, because I was on Despierta America, doing the segment in Spanish and making them aware of the AARP website. Spent the host really wanted me to spend a lot of time on the piece regarding fraud and scams, because he said it's just those little tips and those insights that, quite frankly, I think everybody needs, but just wanting to make sure that, unfortunately, older Americans become a target in these situations. And so that education, I just keep pounding it with my team. Yes. Do we have enough content? Do we have enough, both digitally as well as in our branches, to make sure that everybody is safe?
Yeah, and you're right. This is a time when sort of the scammiest scam artists, come out and prey upon vulnerable people, because there is also a lot of isolation that goes along with poverty. So, being an older adult of low income does increase risk for social isolation in our lives. and then COVID on top of it, right? It's a bit of a double whammy for social isolation. And that can then, not only does it have hugely negative health impacts that certainly get at this issue of rising healthcare costs, but it can make an older adult more vulnerable to pick up the phone if there's a scam or something else. So Alice, I'm glad you brought it up. And AARP is a wonderful fraud watch network, and we have all of those resources at the AARP Foundation and Chase collaborative site, along with all of the links to the research for Financial Health Network that you've been engaging in with us.
Thank you. The report that we did around older Americans in fintech talked about some important principles when designing for that demographic. The one that, the two actually that I thought were most interesting was, one is putting users in control. One of the things that older Americans in particular don't like is the idea that they set it and then things are happening and they're not able to turn it on, to turn it off, to control it. I thought the other thing that was super interesting was this idea of they're feeling stigmatized in the sense that when you see ads for fintech apps, you don't see any older Americans usually in the pictures in the marketing. It's all marketed at young people. And so they don't actually feel like they are a valued customer. And so those are two things I think to keep in mind. I do have a question from the audience that relates back a little bit to this issue of scams, but also to a different kind of access, to broadband access.
Yes.
The question is around what safeguards can be built in for the use of mobile technology? And like what happens if all of a sudden you lose your internet access? And what are we doing to make sure people have internet access in the first place, particularly in rural areas, or to have it be affordable? That sort of seems like a prerequisite in order to even engage in the first place.
Yeah, again, Alice and I can both jump in on this. I really appreciate, thank you for the question. And it's important because as we're now disrupting digitally, which will allow us to have very effective solutions available to more individuals who need them, and certainly to more low income and vulnerable older adults, we have to remember that not everyone has access to the internet, either because broadband isn't available or because they can't afford it. So it really is the right question. I'm really proud that my colleagues at AARP work on these issues all of the time. This is one of those systemic issues, right? If we want to build equity into society and communities, we have to be sure that we're looking at access to fundamental services that provide financial inclusion and inclusion at all levels in communities. So I would say providing that service, then having affordability of tools that need to be in people's hands. And then I think, Alice, you can speak to the fact that as it relates to the way the bank builds technology, safety and security is the top priority when you're building out. And when we're building out at AARP Foundation, our My Savings Jar tool or our Self-Saver tool.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it is a top priority. I do think that the issue of broadband is real. I have seen some of the communication partners like step it up, as particularly during COVID, where they were providing those services. I believe Comcast was one of the examples. But I think we need to find a more long-term solution, quite honestly, Jennifer. And it's something that I know that our foundation, the JP Morgan Chase Foundation, is looking at with different partners, but we recognize that it definitely is an opportunity.
Often when we think about the need for more and cheaper broadband access, the people we tend to first think about are school children.
Yes.
But, understanding that this affects everybody, including older Americans, it strikes me that there's maybe a new coalition that can be built on this issue, a much broader coalition maybe than ever before.
I think you're right. You're right, Ken. And also one that's multi-generational. Because as you've been saying, and as Alice said earlier about the videos, reminding us that financial education really needs to start early on in the life. And we heard that in the videos. So I think a coalition is great, one with intergenerational. When I was doing my binge watching last night again of this terrific series and body of qualitative research, I thought this should be shown in families. It should be shown in schools, when we're providing financial literacy and education, talking to these really generous, wonderful older adults who are just sharing their stories. Probably, I was trained as a teacher, would have great impact, across the generations.
Yeah, I agree.
I also think that, just to pick up on your point, Jennifer, about, just some of the insights, right, from the research that's been done around not feeling like the fintechs are targeting, right, this population. I've been very proud of the work that JP Morgan Chase has done with the foundation as it relates to the Financial Solutions Lab, which obviously you guys do a fabulous job of partnering with us on. And I think that that's a real opportunity, is to, as we're getting all of those insights and we're working with these different fintechs, as particularly the ones that are targeting older Americans, I think that that's going to be an opportunity to take a lot of these learnings and create some even better innovation. I know that the members of the Solutions Lab are already doing some great work, but I don't know, part of me says, as you look at these videos, like, okay, maybe we reset.
I'm with you on that, Alice. I was thinking, rewatching, but also, Jennifer, hearing you bring up, just underscoring how much the research has identified the barriers that exist. So it is innovation, just as we do at AARP Foundation, your innovation has to intentionally be addressing the barriers and complexity of financial decision-making over time. Otherwise, we get our heads turned by exciting product or service ideas in search of a solution. And so when the research is driving us to root causality or barriers, let's leverage it. Let's leverage it in innovation.
Yeah, and I on the one hand, I think there's power in encouraging entrepreneurs to build solutions specifically for older Americans. I think, though, we fall short if we stop there, because I think that there are lots of existing tools or new tools being built that really could be useful for anyone.
Yes.
As long as they're designed, that they take into consideration certain design principles that are particularly important for this demographic, and that they then think about their marketing so that, again, it feels like it's for everybody. So there are some needs that are unique to older Americans, but there are many needs they have that are similar to many other people who are struggling. And if we could really harness the full power of fintech, I think we'd see even more opportunities and solutions.
I mean, no surprise to me that you've raised another critical point, which is there's a lot of design that is just age inclusive, right? Across the life course or the lifespan. And as the research shows, so then when you have a great tool or product that could be used by all, just really drive into your marketing campaign so that you're speaking to all the audiences, both visually in your images and also in your language. And, we find this, I bet you do at Chase as well, Alice, which is when I think about the work the income team at the foundation has done to build out my savings jar for using community savings groups and challenges with a digital tool, or Self-Saver, which is helping, self-employed individuals plan and save for their taxes. Many of the participants are younger than 50. So it does, our experience proves what you're saying, Jennifer.
Lisa, I'm glad you took the conversation in the direction of solutions, because I want to spend our closing time here talking about what's happening, what good work is already happening, and what needs to be happening. So you mentioned a couple of products that AARP and the foundation have designed, My Savings Jar, and I'm sorry, remind me the second one?
Self-Saver.
That's right, Self-Saver. I'd like you to either talk a little bit more about those, or talk about some additional solutions that you all have built, and what else you think is lacking. And then Alice, the same for you.
Yeah, happy to quickly. And I want to start by saying, I think the most powerful solution is what the three of us are representing, finding organizations who have common mission and passion and commitment to increasing financial resiliency for underserved individuals and communities. That collaboration across sectors is really key toward finding pathways, I think, for success for individuals and communities. But our tools are designed to reach the barriers that the research has identified. And so Self-Saver, as I said, recognizes that for many older adults, again, the video series underscores this, they lose a job, they can't find a job when they're older, they're making decisions about being an entrepreneur or being self-employed, and then it's like, aha, how do I pay my taxes? So Self-Saver really is a digital tool that allows that. My Savings Jar addresses what you've done so much research in, Jennifer, with Financial Health Network, such a low savings rate across this nation, and urging and coaching people to have a habit of savings, not to then hold it in your savings account because you need financial slack, right? Something happens, use it. We tie all of those solutions with our workforce training, upskilling, reskilling, and the need for individuals to continue to be employed, both because they need to and they want to. So again, the big solution is innovation coupled with programs that are working in communities today and driving integration of the resources.
And before I turn it over to you, Alice, earlier this week, I think it was day one, the theme of Emerge was livelihoods.
That's right.
About work, about the role of employers, about small business. I think that we, again, the stereotype is, oh, older Americans, they're stopping working. These videos will show you that
they are not.
People want to stop. They are not.
No, we have the one video of a woman who's still working 2 jobs, right?
Correct.
And worried about when she has to stop. So they're not stopping. First of all, if you do, you don't have income, but you fall out of the safety net, right, of so many benefits and programs you have. AARP research also indicates that age inclusion or age diversity in a workforce is good for business. Yeah. So it's another one of those lenses of diversity and inclusion that we should be thinking about.
I also think that the number of solutions we're seeing come online that are aimed at gig worker employees, many of whom are older Americans, again, is an example of where we can't forget that older Americans are a big part of that market. In fact, on the very first video, one of the people we talked to is hoping to drive for Lyft.
That's right.
So let me turn it over to Alice. Talk to us about solutions that you've put in place or that you're seeing out in the world, and any gaps that you'd like to see filled.
Yeah, so last year we rolled out our auto save program. So very similar to what Lisa is talking about with Savings Jar with the AARP product. Auto save allows you to set different goals and set different payday rules so that you can make that transfer right from your checking to your savings, with a real strong emphasis on people like building their rainy day fund. We've had a lot of great success with that. We're very excited about the results that we're seeing, and we continue to amplify it with all of our customers. The second is our secure checking product. And we saw a need for a very simple checking account product that did not allow you to overdraft. Again, being very sensitive to particularly people that are on very tight budgets and who are in a very, limited income. And again, lots of great success. It doesn't allow you to overdraft. It's a checklist checking account. It allows the customer free money orders, free cashier's check. And again, we have found that for some people, right, they just want simplicity. They want a very simple account that has a very low monthly fee, that they don't have to worry about any unnecessary fee, because as you guys have mentioned, even a small fee that you're not expecting can take people into a little bit of a tailspin. And then finally, I'll mention that through the JP Morgan Foundation, we have made a $250 million commitment to just business and philanthropic around the economic challenges that we have. Again, specifically related to what's happened with COVID, as we all know, particularly in our minority communities, in our low to moderate and some of our low to moderate income communities, we've just seen a really big impact. So we know all the stats, right, that people struggle with prior to COVID. Now it's just like magnified, like, I would say like, 10 times, maybe 100 times. So we're proud of what we've put on the agenda so far, but we know we have so much more to do.
I could keep going on this conversation, but I have to wrap it up. And I want to wrap it up by reminding everyone who's watching and listening that under the related content on this page, you're going to find the videos. For each video, you're going to find an accompanying brief that goes into detail about the statistics and the research. You're also going to find a sign up for a couple of webinars that we're doing later in July, diving into some of the specific themes that came out of the video. And you can also see the FinTech report that we mentioned earlier also there. So you have lots of reading to do if you want to continue to explore this important topic. Thank you so much to Lisa and to Alice for your partnership, for your support, and really for championing this really important set of issues.
Happy to be in the work with the two of you.
Ditto.
Good morning or afternoon to some of you. Welcome to our panel. I'm Deborah Winchell, joining you from BlackRock, where I lead our global social impact team, and I serve as president of BlackRock's foundation. As you already know, today is a day focused on really talking about rebuilding and resilience. And in this panel, we're going to dive into short-term savings, which all of us, certainly in this conversation, believe is just critical to creating a financial safety net and cushion and really building and protecting and sustaining financial health for so many people. This conversation feels really more important than ever today as we're facing perhaps the biggest economic downturn since the Great Depression. But in reality, as we all know on this panel, this was a problem that needed to be fixed well before we faced COVID-19. And that's why we launched at BlackRock the Emergency Savings Initiative to help pilot, test, and build short-term savings innovations, and really in partnership with everybody on this panel. So let me jump right in and introduce our fabulous panelists. I'm going to start with Karen Andrus, who's the Director of Policy and Market Solutions and the Project Director of the Retirement Savings Initiative at the Aspen Institute's Financial Security Program. Karen works on advancing solutions for American families against really most pressing financial security challenges across a variety of sectors and disciplines. Mariel Beasley, who's co-founder and principal of Common Sense Labs, which is part of the Center for Advanced Hindsight within Duke University. They're a research lab focused on behavioral insights that influence people's decision-making around spending, saving, borrowing, and earning. Tim Flocka, Executive Director and co-founder of Commonwealth, a nonprofit that strengthens the financial opportunities and security of financially vulnerable people by discovering ideas and solutions and driving innovation at scale. And Joe Phillips, joining us from the UK, who's Director of Research and Innovation at Nest Insight, which is a collaborative research unit set up to really understand and address the challenges facing the Nest pension scheme members and other defined contribution savers as part of the UK government's auto enrollment. I should say a very good afternoon, almost good evening, Joe, to you. So thanks everyone for joining. We have a number of different perspectives on this panel today, and I'm really excited just to launch in. So Tim, I'm going to start with you. As you might have suspected, you've spent a good part of your career really working on issues related to financial security and empowerment. And you've thought a lot about the factors that come together to contribute to sort of the financial context of so many households in the United States, from cost of living increases, wage stagnation, health costs, student debt, and of course, not to forget the economic burden that comes with the structural and the systemic racism that's affecting Black and Latinx communities. we talk so much about all the challenges, but not as much conversation about the lack of opportunities and access for people to save. Can you paint a picture of why access to liquid savings is so challenging, particularly for low to moderate communities and for communities of color?
Absolutely, and it's such an honor to join this group today. So I'm really happy to have the chance. Deborah, I really want to pick up on one piece of what you said, which is the adjective liquid savings, or we might say emergency savings, because it's, as you said, I've spent a lot of time in the savings space, and it turns out that particular word is really significant. That still to this day, for so many of us, savings conjures up a long-term enterprise and a notion of rising balances over time. And that's natural for providers because frankly, the business case for that product is a lot clearer. And even when we think about emergency savings, a lot of us still have a kind of a model in mind of break the glass, a dire, infrequent emergency arises and we smash open the piggy bank and then we have something to manage through the crisis. But it turns out, what we really know now is that for the overwhelming majority of families, we're not talking about a break the glass moment. We're talking about a shock absorber. We're talking about something that goes up and down as they live through a really rough, bumpy ride. And it turns out, to your question about access, that particular kind of savings product, that up and down product, is still pretty hard to find. If you walk into most banks and you say you want to store a small amount of money and it's going to go up and down every week or every month, and the balance will stay fairly modest, they'll charge you a fee. Until very recently, Reg D has limited how many transfers could occur between checking and savings accounts, although I'm excited to say that's no longer true as of several months ago, so there's an opportunity there. So, even though we have a lot of savings products, that particular really important use case is very hard to find. And that's why we know AARP recently reported, based on Financial Health Network's Pulse data, that 53% of US households still don't have an emergency savings account. And as all of my colleagues here know, that's driving us to look for new platforms and new distribution systems like the retirement system and the workplace and retail outlets, maybe the 529 education system, health savings accounts, technology platforms that might be much better suited to these liquid up and down saving tools. And these systems have characteristics. They typically have scale. They have, frankly, incentives to focus on near-term worker or customer or stakeholder financial security. And many of them operate with a sort of public license that really gives them special advantages and opportunities to serve and make it logical that we might expect them, to play a part in what I think we would say is truly a public crisis. I did want to circle back to what you so rightly noted, that there is a clear racial dimension to this challenge, and this seems like in a moment when we really need to stop and acknowledge that. We had a chance to do a little bit deeper analysis by income, race, and gender of the widely cited $400 stat from the Federal Reserve, which is, would you be able to handle a $400 expense? And it turns out that for 2019, the data is recently out, and 34% of us say, without any income restrictions or race specialization, that we wouldn't be able to handle a $400 expense. If you cut that by households under $60,000, it jumps from 34% to 52% who say they wouldn't be able to handle that expense. If you then look at women respondents under 60K, it jumps further to 57%. And then when we look at Black households living under $60,000, 70% report they wouldn't be able to handle a $400 expense based on cash equivalents. So we can see, a figure that we all have heard, and whether it was 42% a couple years ago or apparently 34% today, is dramatically different when we begin to disaggregate and really cut it. So I think we have more statistics. I won't get into them right now, but I think it begs the question, what do we do about it? I want to say clearly, we don't feel we have all the answers. I do think we know that the banking system and financial services, like frankly, much of America, has a history of discrimination, particularly against Black households, from redlining from redlining to recent accounts we've read of pretty overt racism in bank branches. And it certainly seems we see that reflected in the data. So both the Commonwealth and as part of the Emergency Savings Initiative, we've really one critical thing is we're trying to focus on the institutions and the systems and recognize this is not an individual level problem, whether we're talking about racism or financial insecurity. This requires being conscious. I mentioned the retirement system as a promising platform. We know that the Pew research tells us that while 63% of non-white Hispanic workers have access to workplace retirement savings, that figure falls to 56% for Black non-Hispanic workers, 55% for Asian non-Hispanic workers, and down to 38% for Hispanic workers. So we have to be paying attention to those kinds of issues as we work on this challenge.
Before we talk about solutions, which I know you referred to, I think it's just, there's a moment to pause, because I think it's so surprising if you're not that familiar with this space, when you think, well, people aren't saving because they don't have money to save. But the first thing you talked about was the lack of access to, attractive savings vehicles. I wonder if the panel can just stay on that for a minute and talk a little bit about, like, why is that the problem, as opposed to like it's a cash flow issue, and which of course is a component of it, but I think this is a unique dimension that not everyone hears about.
Yeah, so I'll jump in on that. So, Tim really kind of talked about some of the real challenges around like how products aren't really built to be liquid savings products. And, essentially people sort of, that helps control and shape how we think about and use those products. And so, because the products aren't really built and designed to be highly liquid, what that also means is that people are reluctant to use it as a liquid space. So even though, when people say, oh, what do you mean there's no access? You go to any bank, there's savings accounts and, X, Y, or Z, but it's really about how, we know that from a behavioral perspective, that many, many households, when they have to make a withdrawal from that savings account, they actually feel like it's a significant loss and a failure. Rather than the account served its purpose. And so you actually do see a lot of people who have had great savings behavior, have an emergency, make a withdrawal, and then don't refill it because it was such a defeating feeling. Because the product is not built to sort of feel like it's this liquid refilling, emergency savings vehicle. So I just kind of want to highlight that it really is that the, poorly designed products inform, or less optimally designed products really inform how we interact with those products and how we think about, understand, and use them, which then essentially what happens is people say, oh, I might have an expense. We actually did an experiment a few years ago where we tried to prime people with thinking about an unexpected expense as a way to get them to put money into a savings account. And what we found is it backfired. That actually by priming people to think about an emergency expense made them less likely to want to move it into a savings account, because they were like, our thoughts is that it's because people were like, oh, I might need to spend this soon. I should keep it in my checking account because I don't want to have to withdraw it from my savings. So it really is sort of, the product has really informed the mental model that we have about savings, which really prohibits people accessing and using them in ways that are actually, incredibly beneficial to their financial health and well-being.
I think Marielle's talked about the money, kind of when you take the money out of the savings account, but I think the other thing is kind of when you put the money into the savings account. So, the model is either sort of save money when you remember on an ad hoc basis, and we know there's lots of behavioral barriers to that, or there's an automatic savings mechanism that relies on a kind of regular pound or dollar amounts once a month. And, a lot of people aren't paid once a month. They may be paid weekly, or in the case of self-employed people, they're paid in a kind of variable and uncertain way. So looking at ways that people can make savings automatically, but also flexibly, that those two things aren't a trade-off. So a percentage of every payment paid through a payment app, or a percentage of every invoice paid, or a variable amount depending on how much I'm paid that month. It just feels like it opens up saving to a wider group of people.
And I'll just add, we have to think about the plumbing of our system too, right? And if you think about the US plumbing compared to other countries, whether Canada or the UK, we don't have a real-time payment system. We have a very fragmented financial services marketplace to circle back to the point about racial discrimination, by far in this country, those who are unbanked are disproportionately Black. And so while on average over the past decade or two, we've seen significant declines in the rate of unbankedness, largely thanks to technology, to fintech, et cetera. There are some places in this country you can go, places in the Mississippi Delta, for example, and you still find high degrees of people without bank accounts, or people who have a bank account but really don't use it. And there are a lot of reasons that go into that. But I think both the design of the accounts that are available and also the general plumbing of our system. You go to Canada, and there's a law on the books that says, except for a few instances, of criminal behavior, everyone in Canada has a right to a bank account. That is not the case in the United States. And so, I think we need to look kind of broadly at the system of plumbing that has really prevented full access to even imperfect savings tools.
Karen, we're going to come back to the system of plumbing in a few minutes, but I'm going to come back to Mariel first. And can you talk a little bit about what we're seeing right now? This group has talked a lot about savings in an emergency. And now here we are facing an emergency, and we're seeing lots of different trends. We're seeing, at least for the moment, savings rates increase. We're seeing people withdrawing from emergency funds and also their retirement funds, because there's the opportunity to do that right now. And so a lot of mixed behavior. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of why you think this behavior is occurring, or what's sort of underlying this behavior? And also, what are some of the lessons in the midst of this that we could take away and perhaps could help inform some of the ideas and solutions that everyone in this panel has been thinking about?
Yeah. So first of all, as you said, yes, we are seeing higher rates of personal savings, even paired with our extremely high rates of unemployment and extremely high rates of people who have had their income impacted negatively during this pandemic. And the way that personal savings rates are calculated is basically it's an inflow-outflow balance sheet. And so when we see rising personal savings rates, it can also mean, and some of that is likely driven by the fact that even the people whose income hasn't changed, their spending has changed significantly. And part of this is because simply it's much harder to spend money right now. Folks aren't traveling. That's a major expense item. Going out to eat a lot less. There's far fewer entertainment options available outside of the home. And so there's lots of places where our expenses have really decreased significantly. And that is contributing in part to that increased personal savings rate. But however, we also do know from a behavioral perspective that these sort of large moments in history and sort of these moments that are incredibly salient and top of mind, and we're hearing about it everywhere, can really actually at the same time also increase motivation to sort of take protective actions. There's some great research that shows that the best time to be a hurricane insurance salesman is right after a hurricane, because it's that moment that is, it's very top of mind. People sort of, the risk is salient. They know people have been impacted. They're seeing it on the news. And it's in that moment that they are sort of most willing to go ahead and take that protective action. And so that's likely also what's happening in many cases with the savings. And so people are actually also making deliberate choices to cut their expenses, to put more money into savings. And we're seeing that also in some of our data with our partners. We actually very early on, we have a partnership with Capital, which is a fintech that does sort of automatic savings rules. And early on in the pandemic, we basically were able to track the percent of new users who were setting emergency savings as their first goal coming into the app. And what we saw is sort of pre-pandemic, it was about 2.5% were setting emergency savings as their first goal. And in the first basically month and a half of it really rising in the news, that increased to about 20%. So a massive increase. And we actually correlated that with the Google Trends search of coronavirus. And it actually correlates very nicely that the rise correlates with that, the saliency of the virus. Additionally, we are, early when the stimulus checks were first starting to be deployed, we did a planner where we asked people to think about what they were doing with their stimulus check and to sort of plan for it, to really stretch it. And what we found is that on average, people actually plan to try to hold 50% of it for later. So people very salient thinking about, I might need this in a month, I might need this in 2 months, and really holding on to it. But as you mentioned, we are seeing that people are dipping into their savings. So we've just very recently completed a nationally representative study. And so we only have the early look results. We don't have the deep dive yet, but some of the sort of headlines are that a lot of people, so more than half, about 58%, have either continued to save as before or saved more recently than pre-COVID. However, the ways that the rest of the folks are sort of handling their change in income and whatnot is that they're either contributing less. So about 13% are, just basically saying, I'm just contributing less than I was before into savings. I'm now using that money for other expenses. About 20%, a little less than 20%, have actually actively withdrawn from their savings. And I would note that the most common reason why people have withdrawn is for those basic necessities. It's groceries, it's, utilities, it's really to meet, and the rent. Those are the top three. And then the last way is that actually we're seeing fewer people who are paying their full credit card balance. So people are also actually using debt to finance some of their, expenses, rather than, in some cases, rather than dip into savings, or in some cases, rather than skip some of these real necessities. And as you also mentioned, we are seeing some people dipping into their retirement savings, and that was actually allowed under the CARES Act to sort of allow people to dip into it without the additional penalties. However, with the data that we have access to and the folks that we surveyed, we're actually seeing a much smaller group of folks who are actually touching their retirement savings. We're seeing about 5% only actually rating their retirement savings. However, what we are seeing is that those who are rating it are rating all of it, which is very troubling. Also for, when we think about not just how people are coping now, but what's going to happen when those folks are getting ready to retire, and now they've had this major setback in withdrawing those retirement savings. So that's sort of what we're seeing. But getting to your question about what does this mean, and how do we sort of take this as lessons learned for really preparing and building better solutions moving forward. It's basically, I think it really emphasizes that right now is the time to build those much better pipes, those much better products, those much better sort of smart automation. And, the reason why I kind of focus on that is because motivation is high. And so that's great. Let's use that motivation. Let's capitalize on that motivation to get people started. But then let's have that smart automation that Joe was talking about that really is tied to a fluctuating income that is sort of paired with that, so that as people's income changes and fluctuate, they're saving what they can afford to save. And I think that's an at the moment that they're earning. And I think those are some of the really key lessons, is that, people's income is fluctuating, but they're still very motivated to save. So we need to really lean in and develop some of those smarter strategies. And my favorite that I've, been pushing for a little while now. So apologies to anybody who's been on calls with me lately about short-term savings. Really, really thinking a huge opportunity is around splitting that direct deposit and, into a short-term savings and a checking account. As that key moment, it's timed with your income. It varies by that income. It's a really lovely solution and now's the time to do it, especially because as more people are coming back to work as part of the recovery, you're having now all of a sudden people have to go through and fill out the direct deposit forms all over again. So it's a really good opportunity to capture a larger pool of folks. And then the other thing that I would say is that, knowing about how people are dipping into their short-term savings, but also we're seeing some people are sort of nervous to touch it. That goes back to Tim's points about this, we don't really actually have a good concept of a liquid savings account. Is that this is also a time to really lean into the idea of savings as a cash flow tool, as a cash flow management tool, rather than as a, that shock absorber, rather than as just an accumulation account. And so, that's really thinking about, not just your checking and savings account structure, but really more of, your checking account, which is your daily regular expenses, your, micro savings account, which is actually just saving for the bills that are going to come later that month, but not yet. Your emergency savings account that is for those unexpected, shocks and changes and expenses that you aren't really planning for, but are going to happen at some point. And then your goal-based savings that really are those that are less liquid, that are, more protected, and that are really goal, where the aim really is an accumulation account. And I think those are kind of the main strategies that that kind of come out of the things that we're learning and seeing.
It's interesting. It always strikes me your split deposit mantra, because it goes back to, as often is the case, the simplest is the most elegant and the most impactful. And it's just a change that so many employers and others can relatively easily make, and that you've demonstrated has, pretty significant impact. I'm just going to, Joe, bring you in on some of the comments that Mariel made about behaviors and what you're seeing and solutions in the UK, because of course you operate in a different regulatory environment. You at Nest have been able to pilot this idea of linking short and long-term savings and creating that sort of liquidity for people to draw in an automatic way. Can you just talk a little bit about some of the observations that you've seen both pre-COVID and sort of in the midst of this around behaviors and some of the lessons that you're learning?
So I want to pick up on one of Mariel's points about this kind of motivation to save, but also the observation that some people are sort of saving by default now because they can't spend, but also some people are really not in that position. And, that split. So richer households are not going out and not going on holiday and not commuting and kind of saving by default. But then we also have, low income households where they're dipping into any savings they have or taking on debt to cope with essential food costs and bills. And what we've piloted in the UK, or what we're piloting currently in the UK, is a hybrid savings tool that gets to some of what Mariel was saying about, rather than things being separate sort of competing priorities for people, that you join them up together so that people don't have to make these difficult choices. So we're piloting a savings tool called JARS in partnership with Salary Finance, and an individual signs up to save an amount per pay period into JARS, and at first that money goes into an emergency savings account, and when it reaches the target for that emergency savings account, it automatically rolls over as an additional pension contribution on top of the contributions the individual's already making under auto enrollment pensions in the UK. I think just in terms of the observations kind of pre-COVID and now, although that design was really well received by employers, by employees, by policymakers, by the industry, I think it's really important to note that take up of that is still quite low. And I think that really gets to some of the barriers that we need to overcome, some of the inertia, some of the difficulty of finding the time and the energy and the headspace actually to sign up for something, even if you want it and you think it's a good idea. And so one of the things that we're looking at going forward is whether we can add to that pilot an automatic enrollment into the sidecar savings tool, to really see if we remove some of those barriers, if we make it an opt-out rather than an opt-in, if we set some smart defaults around how much you save and what your savings target is, what does that do to participation rates? And then I think, just to go back to the group who are saving now and the group who can't save now, I think if we expand that idea beyond the flow from saving for the short term to saving to the long term, I think we also need to think about those people who Mariel talked about, who want to be saving, for whom saving is kind of looming large right now. The risk of not having savings is really top of mind. But if people can't save right now, what could we do to harness that motivation now? Because we know from other financial crises that the savings ratio drops again right afterwards. So are there pre-commitments that people can make now, even if they can't save now, whether that's going from debt to savings pathways, so agreeing that once that debt is paid off, that debt payment can turn into a savings payment. And we're seeing some employers thinking about that we're working with in the trial, that if I offer a hardship loan to my employees now, I could just talk to them about, we're going to plan that you pay this off within a year, and at the end of that you could translate that into a savings payment, or even just setting up a savings pot and a reminder to come in 3 months' time. Can you do it yet? Just any kind of pre-commitment that capitalizes on this motivation and the salience of saving right now, but mindful that that's just not possible for a lot of households.
Yeah. It's interesting, the pilots that you've been running, you've learned so much about what doesn't work as well as what does work, in terms of how do you create that next level of, as we say, make it easy, make it automatic. And I think that's a lot of the lessons that we've been finding to help people have that opportunity to just save. It's so evident from the work you've done and from the studies that we've seen, and even the behaviors that we're seeing in COVID, how inextricably linked short and long-term savings are, and the criticality of short-term savings, even just, as a cash flow tool, yes, and all the ability to meet emergencies, yes, but also to protect and hopefully over time create long-term savings. Karen, you started out early on talking about like the plumbing. Can you talk a little bit about what can policymakers be doing? What are the kinds of regulatory things that we could see that would really help create a better pathway to creating these opportunities?
Sure, thanks. And I should say too, thanks to our friends at Financial Health Network for having us at this conversation. I think I want to start by just saying, and I appreciated Mariel's drawing out, what is the purpose of emergency savings, right? I mean, we often talk about the proverbial tire that gets blown or the furnace needs fixing. And right now we are well beyond that. We are in a moment where I think, I don't think any of us think that there's an emergency savings tool or option that can cover 6+ more months of total income loss, right? I mean, I think we need to acknowledge that there's also a conversation here around insurance, social insurance, right? A more robust safety net that can catch people in this kind of catastrophe. But putting that aside, there's always going to be the blown tire and the furnace that dies. I think Tim mentioned, and I know our friends at JPMorgan Chase Institute found, this need for a slush fund that just covers that basic income volatility, right? Sometimes it's not about an emergency. It's just, I know that my income is going to go up and down and my expenses are going to go up and down at different points, and I need some float to help cover that. So thinking about those different purposes, we kind of come at this from the other end of what Mariel was saying. She was building up, right, from checking account to that really like that super slush liquid fund to the goal-based funds. What's at the other end of that is retirement savings. And so we're in this funny position in the US where we have built out this imperfect, and I'll get to that in a second, but very robust and sophisticated private retirement savings systems, the defined contribution system, right? The 401ks and the 403bs that so many of us probably at this conference have access to at work. And while that system leaves out roughly half of private sector workers, somewhere between 40 and 50 million people, disproportionately people who are female, Black, and brown, because they work for small businesses that tend to not offer those options. We do know that for those who do have those tools at work, they work really well. And part of the reason that they've been working really well is automaticity, right? Is we are, thanks to the work of Cass Sunstein and Richard Thaler, we now are mostly defaulted into it, right? To Joe's point, it's automatic. We're automatically enrolled into our 401k at work. I think our question is why can't we be automatically enrolled into emergency savings, right? And putting tax advantages aside for a second, right? We tax advantage retirement savings. We don't tax advantage short-term liquid savings. Even just the ability to sort of be automatically enrolled into emergency savings. So that's sort of, I'll come back to that, but I think that's one policy opportunity, is making it really explicitly clear, or creating an innovation sandbox around the ability to automatically enroll people. I think we're interested at Aspen, given that connection that you talked about, Deborah. We think that the short-term stability and long-term security are really inextricably linked. And you can see that actually in a few different ways with retirement savings and short-term savings. We know that I believe it's a quarter of people withdraw money from a 401k when they separate service from an employer. And we know that totals roughly $56 billion a year in leakage, right? People are taking money out when they leave a job because they need it. They need it for expenses. We also, and I think Mariel's team is doing some testing, so you can tell me if I'm wrong, Mariel, but I certainly suspect, many of us suspect, that there's actually a connection between people not enrolling or participating in their 401k because they don't have liquid savings, right? There are 22 million people in the US who have access to a 401k at work but don't use it. And so people know that if they put it in their 401k, they've locked it up And they know that the tire is going to blow, and they know that they're going to want that money. And so they just never enroll, or they opt out. And so I think that that deep connection between the two, between people knowing that they want short-term stability and they want long-term security, but our systems are built for it, means that I think we have an opportunity to pilot or test these systems like what Joe and her team at Nest have built and what they're studying. How can you take that payroll deduction and divide it into a variety of different pots or jars or buckets with different tax treatments or different investment options or not, different amounts of liquidity. But to build that would require some policy, if not change, then some clarity, right? The 401k system is largely governed by ERISA. We have banking regulations, to Tim's point, that would make it difficult to have the level of liquidity we want in retirement savings. And we've got multiple sort of layers of regulation and the different kinds of systems we could use to build this, that I think there's an opportunity for us to kind of lay it all out on the table and say, how do we make emergency savings automatic? How do we make it sort of tied to retirement security in a way that benefits both our short-term and our long-term? How do we make it simple and clear? How do we give payroll providers, record keepers, the clarity that they need to go ahead and pilot some of these solutions?
I'm curious.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm curious, Karen and probably Tim, is there a quick win from a legislative or a regulatory perspective that you think is on the horizon that would really provide a great opportunity for some piloting or even a significant change that would make a difference in this environment?
I'll take this, and then Tim, you can jump in. I do know that Senator Doug Jones of Alabama has introduced some legislation that would very explicitly say that there is that sort of give the green light for automatic enrollment into workplace emergency savings accounts. And while we're sort of in discussion behind the scenes to make sure that that is as beneficial as possible to a wide variety of workplace emergency savings models, I think getting that through and putting that sort of on the map would certainly help elevate this issue, not just with other members of Congress, but also with some of the regulators that need to be involved to help work out some of the kinks. But Tim,
Great.
I don't know if you can add anything.
Tim, I'd love a few words, and then I am going to try to make time for questions, I promise. So I'd love if you have anything to add to that.
Very, very quickly, I think that what Karen described in terms of the legislative path makes a lot of sense. It also turns out, if you go back and look at how we got to automation in the retirement system, that in many cases, employers went first before there was regulatory clarity. And I think this is a moment where we need to do that too. We're actively seeking to get as much clarity as we can from federal regulators, and we are in the market for an employer who wants to dance. We think we can do this and show. And it's really hard for me to imagine who the regulator is that's going to come after you for trying to figure this one out. So I think we can both, pursue the sensible sort of get it in writing path, and we can also go out there and build the evidence case that this is a good idea. And so if that kind of suits your character, let's talk, because we can do it.
Okay. So employers, Tim's dance card is open. Please call. I'm going to switch to a couple of questions. I think we have a few minutes. The first question that came in is very interesting for anybody. Except for maybe Joe, sorry. What changes to the traditional savings account would you suggest would make it more accessible or available, compelling for liquid savings? So we talked so much about fintechs and all these other options, but what about the traditional savings account and the banks?
Yeah. So I think two things. One is that are just like immediately top of mind. I'm sure that you all have some additional things to add, but one is really, really emphasizing focusing on an automatic refilling feature within that account. So many of for the traditional savings account is that the default is that it's manual contributions. That you are, when you feel like you have extra money to save, you put it in there. But a truly liquid account means that it is constantly filling and coming back down, which means we really need to focus on those automatic contribution sort of ways that are built into that account that are really the automation first, rather than automation as a, added on thought for folks who want to put it in. And then the second piece that I would note is that, right now, the traditional model, and I sort of alluded to this earlier, the traditional model is a single savings account. And, you know, it doesn't separate goal-based savings from liquid savings. And we really should think of those as two separate products and two separate accounts. And helping name those, I think, is also an incredibly helpful thing to do to help kind of reinforce that mental model that this is your rainy day account that will constantly fill and empty and fill and empty and fill and empty. And this is your accumulation savings account. So those are two things just top of hand that and every financial institution should. This is the other thing is that, you know, unless you're a credit union, by default, most new account openings are not defaulted to open a checking with a savings. You know, the big difference is sort of the reverse challenge at credit unions where the default is that you've opened a savings account and maybe not a checking account. But really thinking about account opening is about this sort of collection of account packages and thinking through the way that those work.
I'll just jump in quickly on the substance side. Minimums, fees, and transfers between transaction and savings. No minimums, preferably no fees, and now take advantage of the Reg D change. And then maybe to underscore Marielle's point, it's the substance really matters and the framing and optics really matters. And so people still don't get that this is there for their, you know, for their day-to-day lives. So you got to figure out the branding. We've had great success with rainy day as a concept. And, you know, I think there's a huge opportunity because after transactions, this is probably the most frequent financial need and event in many of your customers' lives. And it's crazy not to figure out how to be present and part of the solution. Even if you can't drive revenue on that particular product line, like what an opportunity to be part of the solution of their day-to-day pain. Like that's gotta be something to seize.
If I could just jump in too, I would say, you know, I think it doesn't have to be a traditional separate savings account, right? I mean, I think we've seen some providers like PNC, oh my gosh, over a decade ago, introduced virtual wallet that used bucketing and, you know, that the interface told you it was separate money when really it wasn't. And I think, you know, I think there's a question as to whether you really need it in a separate account, whether it needs to look like it's in a separate account. The other thing is, you know, while interest rates have been very low for a long time, and we know nobody's getting rich off of the interest on their emergency savings or their savings account, you know, what are you incentivizing? We've been incentivizing the building up of balances. Would it be better to incentivize the behavior? You know, the action of saving, of continuing to save, withdrawing, and continuing to save, right? It's the action that we want to incentivize, not the buildup of the balance. And I realize that there's a business case question there, but from a user perspective, I think the question is, what do you want? What do you want to incentivize? What action do you want them to be taking?
I think we have time for one more question. Mariel, you mentioned, and I know everybody thinks about this, the self-defeating angle of an emergency savings fund. One of our product providers is asking what kinds of things can be structured to prevent that self-defeating component of a product. And I open that up to everyone.
Yeah, so in addition to having it be sort of this automatic process so that even once you've taken, you'd have to kind of go through extra steps to stop contributing to it. I think that's an important feature. But also, I think that there's a lot more that financial institutions can do to celebrate when you've used that money and when you've pulled it out and to actually try to help you actually feel better. And it's sort of like, congratulations, way to go. How great that you had your back, like in this case. And, you know, great, use it, and let's keep going. And I think that adding that element of, you know, celebration, appreciation is really an important component that is missing, that helps reinforce people that it's okay to use this money, it's okay to touch it, and sort of emphasizes that in sort of the mental model we have around that savings account.
Jo, anything you've learned in sort of this regard that might be relevant?
Yeah, I think it's a question we've been asked a lot by people looking at the JARS savings tool. You know, can people take it out for anything? Could they take it out to spend on shoes? And what we've tried to do is build into the communications examples up front of times when you might want to use this money. So it's the unexpected fine or bill. It's the 3 sets of school shoes at once that you weren't expecting. It may just be Christmas presents, but what are the things that you put top of mind as a reason that people might want to have this savings pot and might want to use it. And then I absolutely agree in terms of celebrating reaching savings targets. And this is something that, you know, some some of those partitioned accounts are really good at doing. You set a target and then it celebrates when you've reached that target. And I think, given interest rates are not the main motivation to build up a small pot of emergency savings, peace of mind, knowing I've got something there, knowing I've got a buffer that will protect me against life's up and downs, I think that emotional recognition of having that savings can be really powerful.
And I would just to kind of emphasize, I think it's not only just about celebrating the targets, right? It's also about celebrating like when you've withdrawn, which is actually feels incredibly like, I've said this to a couple of financial institutions and they're like, what? No, we want people not to withdraw. We want people to not. And it's like, well, you want to reinforce that that's what this account is for. And it's, they're actually using it to its fullest if they are indeed withdrawing it. And the expectation that somebody will just set it and reach all of a sudden $2,000 is just not realistic, right? I mean, we know there's lots of research out there that shows that, 60% of households will experience in a normal year, not even this year, but in a normal year, 60% of households will experience a financial shock. If they're not touching their emergency savings, they're covering that shock in other ways that might be less healthy.
Yeah. I'll just say quickly, start with empathy, not judgment. Been doing this for a long time. Never met a person who didn't get that savings was a smart thing to do. They just need help to do it. Let that guide your approach in design and marketing, and you'll be a breath of fresh air.
Tim, I think that's such a great way to close, because I think as we got involved in emergency savings, the thing that was so immediately evident is that everybody wants to save. This is not, the first step is not convincing people to save. It's giving them the opportunity and supporting it and rewarding it or recognizing it. And I think that's a really critical takeaway for today, as well as I hope this conversation just underscores again the criticality of providing short-term savings opportunities for people's broad financial health for the short term and for the long term, and that there are opportunities for everyone, whether it's employers or record keepers or payroll providers or regulators. And I'm sure I'm missing a few, but there's so many opportunities to help create short-term savings vehicles that will help customers and employees and just a host of people who are really facing very challenging economic times today and imaginably for several years going forward. So I just want to thank our panelists, thank Emerge for giving us this opportunity, and it's been a pleasure being part of this conversation. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Letha Reddy, and I lead Inclusive Solutions at Prudential Financial. My colleagues and I spend a lot of time thinking about how we build resiliency and equity into financial wellness. So I want to thank the Financial Health Network for allowing me this opportunity to share a few thoughts on this topic. We've seen how even in the best of times, financial security is still out of reach for too many Americans. COVID-19 and the most recent tragic killings of Black men, women, and children has laid bare the inequities and systemic racism that have always existed, but were out of sight to many. We as a society are faced with a moment of reckoning and a need to make real change. For business, the imperative is clear. Inequity is our greatest disruptor. Prudential's understanding of that was forged in the crucible of Newark, New Jersey, one of our country's oldest and most diverse cities. Many people are surprised to learn that Prudential was founded in Newark 145 years ago, and that the city remains our global headquarters. For 6 days in 1967, Newark's residents rebelled against racial disparities in policing, unequal access to resources and opportunities, and civic disenfranchisement. That moment cemented our belief that our company's success and our community's success are inextricably linked. And earlier this month, as we saw protests return to our city, we were reminded of how far we as a society have to go. Like in many cities across the country, COVID-19 has tested the resilience of Newark's families and small businesses, with a disproportionate negative impact on citizens who already faced entrenched barriers to opportunity. But in recent years, once seemingly immovable problems have begun to shift. Crime rates are down, high school graduation rates are up, neighborhoods are vibrant, artistry abounds, and fast-growing companies are moving in. We've learned a lot through our cross-sector work in Newark over the past 40 years, namely that building resiliency is a ground game, and it's certainly a long game. We've learned other things as well, ideas that are showing promise in Newark and are applicable in other communities. First, as was just discussed, emergency savings is a critical component of resiliency. 63% of Americans don't have enough savings to meet a $500 emergency. In Newark, Black households are on average 3 times as likely than white households to be liquid asset poor, meaning they lack the savings necessary to live above the poverty level for just 3 months if they lose a job, face a medical crisis, or suffer an income disruption or emergency. Prudential collaborated with our partner, Prosperity Now, to design an after-tax, payroll-contributed in-plan emergency savings feature that offers workers a new way to save for retirement, but still have access to their money in case of an emergency. Thousands of people are now making contributions to their after-tax emergency savings feature through this solution. Second, we need to systematically remove barriers to asset building. When financial services organizations aren't meeting the community's needs, it creates obstacles for households and entrepreneurs to build financial security. Seeing this chronic problem in Newark, we came together with local nonprofits, government officials, and other corporations to create the Newark Asset Building Coalition. The coalition offers programs like Newark Tax Prep, which have helped residents receive millions of dollars in refunds and save substantially in tax preparation fees. The coalition also offers financial coaching, small business services, and other wealth building programs. Third, offer paid family and medical leave to all workers. Prudential, which has long provided paid leave programs to its own employees, is a champion of a permanent, comprehensive national solution for providing paid family and medical leave to all workers. The COVID-19 pandemic has made it clear that when more than half of U.S. workers cannot afford to stay home when they're sick, all Americans' health and financial stability is at risk. Right now, only 1/3 of the lowest private sector workers have access to paid leave, compared to 93% of the highest paid workers. Black and Latino workers are less likely than white or Asian American workers to have any leave benefits at all. To be resilient, they need them. Fourth, increase awareness and participation in workplace retirement plans. Employer-sponsored retirement savings plans are the bedrock of the U.S. private retirement system, and small businesses, unfortunately, haven't been able to easily offer this benefit to their workers. The groundbreaking Secure Act changed that. Passed in 2019, the legislation, among other things, increased access to retirement plans for small business workers through open multiple employer plans, or MEPs. MEPs can dramatically open up access to retirement savings, particularly for women and people of color, who make up the majority of small business workers, and make it easier for them to convert savings to guaranteed retirement income that cannot be outlived, thereby creating greater resiliency. And finally, and fifth, lay a strong foundation of core services, things like housing, education, and access to technology. Homeownership builds stability and dignity, and a robust real estate sector with housing at a range of price points is a tried and true economic engine and wealth building engine. Quality public schools are critical to moving up the economic ladder. Communities need a portfolio of options for quality education. And our national digital divide remains a pressing social justice issue. We all know that recovery takes time, shared values, and co-creation across sectors. Sustainable, scalable solutions require investing in those cross-sector partnerships. So we must challenge ourselves to ask, not just what more we can do to be part of the solution, but what is the maximum we can do? How can we move beyond simply coordinating efforts to progress to true collaboration on sustainable systemic pathways? It's a privilege to have spent this time with you today and to be in partnership and collaboration with the Financial Health Network and with all of you to carry these questions into the world, to figure out how together we can create a more just, equitable, and resilient society. Thank you.
And welcome to this session exploring the role of insurance in financial resilience. I'm Sarah Parker, Senior Director at the Financial Health Network, and I'm joined today by 4 panelists representing the wide breadth of the insurance industry. Several years ago, when our organization began to pivot our work around the concept of financial health, resilience was obviously a key component of that. And when we developed our 8 key indicators of financial health, insurance made the list as indicator number 7. So we've recognized the unique role that various lines of insurance play in protecting people against shocks in ways that savings and credit simply can't. And yet most of our work up to that point as an organization was focused on the retail banking industry. So we made a conscious effort several years ago to expand our work into the insurance industry, to begin to understand the main players, the main consumer and business challenges, and ways that we could encourage insurers to see themselves as being in the financial resilience business. So I'm really pleased to be able to moderate this discussion today, bringing together both large incumbent carriers and influential insurtech companies to discuss how insurance can indeed be a primary tool for consumer resilience, which is all the more needed in light of the current pandemic. One note of clarification, whereas yesterday, much of the discussion focused on health and financial health, including health insurance, today our discussion will primarily focus on life insurance and various types of property and casualty lines of insurance, such as auto. So with that background, let me start by asking each panelist to briefly introduce themselves and their companies, and then we'll dive into the discussion. Let's start with you, Peter.
My name is Peter Gross. I work on the emerging customers team of AXA, the world's 2nd largest insurer. We're focused on customers in emerging markets that are faced with a lot of risks.
Great, thank you. Dan?
Hi, I'm Dan Preston. I'm the CEO at Metromile. Metromile is per mile car insurance. So instead of paying one flat rate, you pay cents per mile and save when you don't drive much.
Great. Jen, let's go to you.
Sure. Jen Kishel from MetLife, and I have responsibility for thinking about how we engage with employees of our large group customers and really thinking about how do we make sure that they understand the benefits that they're being offered through their employer.
Great. And Liam?
I'm Liam Monahan, Chief Actuary at Ladder. Ladder is life insurance that's instant, simple, affordable, and flexible. And what we do is use data and technology to put the customer in control so they can get life insurance done easily in just a few minutes.
Excellent, great. So I want to start right where we want this discussion to focus, which is on the consumer. And so I'd like each panelist to share what some of the specific consumer challenges are that you have observed people struggle with the most, where insurance and perhaps your companies in particular can play an outsized role in building people's resilience. This can be in general, or it can be perhaps in light of COVID-19. So let's just maybe go in reverse order. Liam, do you want to start us off with that?
Sure. So when it comes to resilience, life insurance is crucial in helping families with financial resilience. Should the worst happen and a loved one is lost, whatever the cause. And before COVID-19 changed the world, there were 50 million households in the US that didn't have enough life insurance. And that was primarily because it was expensive, it was difficult to understand and pretty difficult to get. And to buy it, you often needed to meet with a guy, and he'd often try to sell you a complex product you wouldn't need, or potentially at a much higher price than you needed to pay. Then you'd have to get your blood drawn by another stranger in your home, or at your office. And then you'd have to wait weeks or months to see if you'd been accepted or not. So I'm not sure if there's a less customer-friendly buying process than that, but that it wasn't ideal. But now imagine doing all of that during COVID-19 quarantine, right? So you're more aware you need it, but the buying process is harder than ever. So the problem we help solve at Ladder hasn't really changed because of COVID-19, but the awareness of how important life insurance is maybe at a modern day high point. And so at Ladder, what we do every month is effectively bank some financial peace of mind for that customer. And what we do differently at Ladder is that we use data and technology to make our process contactless, simple, and affordable. So we can make financial resiliency and peace of mind available to those customers using only their smartphones wherever they are 24/7. So because people have to wear so many hats right now, you worker, parent, teacher, often you have to do all of that at the same time. So everyone's time and bandwidth to deal with these things is being stretched super thin. So making something as important as life insurance easy and simple is huge. And for us, it's all about the customers. So that hasn't been the life insurance's focus. They've been, their average NPS is about 26. And in context, the NPS of the DMV is about 54, which is double. But what we're very proud of what we have done with Ladder is that we have an NPS of 84, and that's something that we work hard to improve on every day.
Great, and I definitely want to come back to some of your underwriting techniques, and there's a lot to dig in there because you have innovated in a lot of really interesting ways. Let's go to you next, Jen, in terms of some of the consumer challenges that you've observed.
Yeah, so I think it's been a challenge for a long time. I think COVID has heightened that challenge. And the challenge is really that we see the most our employees' access to benefits and their understanding of what those benefits are. So the average person who's going through choosing their benefits at their employer is taking less than 15 minutes to make those decisions on what benefits they need for them and their family. And I think there is a gap in communication, both from insurance companies like ourselves and our employers as they're advocating for those employees on making them aware of the benefits, making them understand how those benefits are relevant. And if you think about COVID, and Liam spoke about life insurance and did a really nice job, so I won't dive in there too deeply, but something like a hospital indemnity plan that's offered through the employer, the average inpatient cost for COVID was $20,000. And so that could bankrupt a family in a matter of moments. And so something like a hospital indemnity plan, these are all products that people don't plan for, right? They're things that, oh, that'll never happen to me. I'm not worried about that. And I do think there has to be a better connection between what the products are and how they're relevant to individuals, even outside of COVID. So I wouldn't say that's just a pandemic issue. So we've really tried to take a heightened approach with offering a lot more digital access for employees and thinking about the different ways in which employees want to be communicated to. It's not a one size fits all. Someone may want a video, someone may want a quick product clip, and someone may want to deep dive into the specifics. And so making sure all of those components are offered to employees during their open enrollment, but even beyond, right? It's not the time to compress everything into a 2-week period and hope that people understand their benefits, but really thinking how benefits education goes so far across all the remaining months of the year. And so we really think about that in light of understanding consumers' wants and needs and really trying to work with employers to direct them to help their employees where they need it the most.
Yeah, and your comments really underscore the fact that comparing Ladder as a life insurer and MetLife, you actually approach the customer through different channels. MetLife is largely through the employer, Ladder is largely direct to consumer. And so your engagement with the customer will be quite different. And so you really underscore that a lot. And there's some interesting things also that we can kind of dig into a little bit more. Dan, how about you?
Yeah, so I'll start a bit broadly, even before the pandemic. Car insurance has largely been based on proxies to be able to come up with your price or your premium. And these are things like demographics or your credit score or whatever that might be. And these are largely not within the customer's control. And it also doesn't adapt very well to any changes that you may have in your life, whether you drive less or you choose alternative ways to get around. That static price has generally been true for 100 years. And when we introduced per mile insurance, the basic initial concept was that when you changed your lifestyle, when you chose to drive less, you would then pay less because you get into more accidents when you drive more. It's been known for a very long time. What's been exciting over time that we've learned is the more you can actually lean into the kind of sensor data that you can get from the car these days, regardless of how you access that, we are then able to use more and more of the things that are actually within your control. what kinds of roads you drive on, how fast you speed, other things that are actually more determinant of the risk than these kind of proxy factors that you don't have control over. And I think this is a critical part of how financial services will evolve over time and give more and more of that control to customers. I also think it actually extends far beyond pricing as well. That's where I think most start. But what we've seen is that there's also a lack of control throughout the whole product experience. So in addition to not having control of the price that you get, when you file a claim, you also are generally reliant on how that carrier ends up treating you, your claim, and manages that through body shops and others. And so a big part of this as well is if you can, through the use of better technology, find ways of better managing claims, you can also put that process more in the hands of consumers where they can actually manage through more uncertain periods of their life. So that's more kind of thematically where I think car insurance and many other lines of insurance are heading. In the pandemic, I think auto insurance had a particularly interesting impact where everyone started driving a lot less. The initial impact from the end of I think it was March and into April was about 60% from pre-COVID to like the very bottom. And what that meant for us was about we ended up with about 30% less revenue because our customers were paying 30% less. And you then started to see carriers all across the country starting to give discounts of some level because they were extremely profitable during that period. And it was reflective of the fact that people just weren't getting into accidents because they were driving less. And so what we've seen is there is a strong desire and a strong demand for products that now actually fit a lot of new lifestyles. Regardless of whether or not we get like a vaccine tomorrow, there are gonna be a lot of people who choose to work from home, who have now changed where they live, have different commutes, have changed jobs. There are many people who are still gonna be out of work for a long period of time. And so being able to have the options to be able to pay for the actual insurance that you need, as opposed to paying the same thing as you did pre-COVID, I think is a critical part of that kind of resiliency. And I think products that are tailored to kind of changes in lifestyle can be really important to that.
Yeah. And, you mentioned how all of the big auto insurers gave rebates because people were driving less. And it I think for the most part was just kind of a set percentage or an exact dollar amount. I assume your model is such that you didn't have to make any of those adjustments. That's part of how you have arranged your business, that as people drive less, they pay less.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the nice thing is if you drive less, you're not going to pay for it at all. So we actually had a lot of customers come to us because they effectively stopped driving. And many of the discounts that we've seen are on the order of 10, 15%. But we had customers who were saving 70% because all they were paying was their monthly fixed costs. So yeah, we never actually needed to change anything with the model.
Yeah, that's interesting. Peter, how about you? What have you been seeing in ways of consumer challenges?
Yeah, so I think if you live on $2 to $20 of income a day, which is really the customer segment that we target in our emerging customers group, this is 4 billion people around the world. You're worried every day. You're preoccupied with risk every day. You don't know what's going to happen. You're anxious. News coming in is bad news. That's sort of the whole world's experience now. We're all afraid. We are all worried. And so in a way, we can now put ourselves in the shoes of the 4 billion members of the global population that deal with this all the time. To reach that population, we had to become customer centric as AXA, because there was no way to reach the customer base otherwise. And I think the reality is that our industry has been pretty terrible. The customer has really been seen as the enemy. We call, when you get what you paid for from an insurance company, it's called a loss. I mean, really? We call our features benefits. You don't talk about the features of a computer you're working on, the benefits of that computer. No, it's just the things that you paid for. And so we have all these ideas in our industry that I think are very anti-customer. And what we've learned in our segment of AXA is that we have to turn that completely on its head to reach this market and create a new market where there hasn't been one before. And I think that's what the industry as a whole is really seeing. If you were to sort of take a basic user experience 101 class in Silicon Valley, insurance breaks every single rule in the book. The product is not easy to understand. You can't sort of access it easily. You can't, all the things that Liam and others have said. We think that you can actually build insurance the same way that other products have been built and the same way other industries run, which is with products that can be understood, that people are actually excited to learn about and understand. When you face a lot of risk and someone comes with a solution to your risk, that's going to excite you. The reason why people aren't excited about insurance right now is because we haven't historically done that. So in AXA Emerging Customers, we're really doing that with this brand new market from the ground up and ensuring that these products can be explained in 1 minute or less. They can be communicated in 3 SMSs. They have very, very clear benefits that really meet people where they are. And so I can go more into the things we're doing around COVID, but I think there's a really interesting opportunity here, and that the segment that we serve specifically is sort of a bellwether to where the industry is going next.
Yeah, great. And I do want to come back to some of your experience of how you have reached very low income populations around the world profitably in a way that makes sense for the business, the insurance company, and really makes sense for the customer. So, like many industries, I've seen the insurance industry really reflect on how this moment of a global pandemic presents companies with, an opportunity for positive change. So things like increased flexibility for their customers, better income protection products, being more digitally friendly for sure, reaching all segments of society in a more inclusive way. So I'd like to ask each of you how you see the current crisis really setting the stage for this change in your companies. And Dan, let me start with you. As you said, Metromile was really founded on the principles of flexibility based on how much you drive. And so how have you seen the current crisis emphasize the importance of this flexibility even more? And, you mentioned this in your opening remarks, but what are some other areas of flexibility that you think, can or should be offered to insurance companies, either by Metromile or even just the industry more broadly?
Yeah, absolutely. So certainly what we've seen during this period is a pretty large shift in the way that people are getting to work, what their work actually is, and what the use of that car looks like. In fact, we're actually seeing driving starting to come back close to normal, but it's entirely different driving patterns. And so it looks a lot less like your daily commute and other ways of getting around when you need to actually drive. And so I think a lot of what our customers have been asking for, in many ways we deliver today through the per mile insurance product, but is in general just the flexibility to be able to pay for the kind of risk that you actually have. And so as part of that, and I think there were, and there continue to be new ideas that are coming up even before this period for being able to pick and choose the periods of time where you want to get insured for whatever that might be. And I think when we were at a little bit more of like a steady state before, where the economy was continuing to grow in the way it was, that market was still somewhat nascent. But I think this is a moment in time where you start to really realize that your needs can shift on a day-to-day basis in a way that you may not expect. And so being able to have that flexibility to access that quickly. And I would say that one of the fundamentals there needs to be how you are able to then access that. You can't force customers to go through a lot of friction to ultimately go and find the options that they need. And that leads to maybe your second question, which is kind of maybe going beyond just the kind of initial pricing model. What does that experience need to look like? And so a lot of the focus in our early product development was around, how can we help people with the uncertainty of car ownership in general, which in many ways is what car insurance is about. It's the uncertainty of getting into an accident, but there are other things associated with that, like getting a parking ticket or needing your car repaired or whatever that might be. And so in a world where you may not use your car often, but you may need it, being able to help people through, or being able to help people with many of the things that are uncertain about owning a car in general, these things that are not necessarily at the core of what insurance typically is defined as, can be a really critical part of the value that you ultimately deliver as an insurer. And so I think insurers in general will need to continue to think about more broadly what they offer beyond just kind of the core coverages that are typically thought of as part of insurance.
Yeah. And you obviously are working in a really interesting space within insurance. I mean, insurance industry writ large is very, very broad. But auto insurance is one of the few that is required by law. I mean, you have to have a certain minimum coverage to own and drive a vehicle. So in some ways, the flexibility you offer is so much more important to customers because they really have no choice to opt out.
Right. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Great. Let's go to you, Jen. So as part of MetLife's workforce engagement that you work on, what have you seen as some opportunities to, further engage with your customers to truly focus on their wellness and resilience? And, you're obviously working more through the employer channel, which can bring its own set of challenges.
Yeah, so I think it's a fantastic opportunity for the group insurance space at this time, because I think now more than ever, while employees may not be physically in the workplace, they're more dependent on their employer than ever, right? When they think about their financial wellness and their resiliency, a lot of that gets tied back to what the employer is offering. And so we've seen very direct correlations between employee satisfaction, NPS, with their employer and the amount of benefits they're offering, as an example. One of the things that I'm excited that has come out of this, though, is really a switch to digital, right? So a lot of employers still focused on mailing things home to employees, which is good, except then you can't access the benefits when you're at home because you can only do them on your work computer, which all should change now with people having access to work from home, what they may never have had before. I do think it's a great opportunity too, though, for those instances where perhaps that material wasn't sent home, for employees to go and talk to their families and their spouse, right? More than ever, these decisions need to be made. If you have a significant other or a spouse that leads up the household with you, you need to make those decisions together. And so I do think that this pandemic situation and people being accessing work from home, they can go to the dinner table and have the conversations much more easily and remember that they just saw that email versus going home from work, commuting, and then forgetting about it. The other thing I think that is really helpful for us, hopefully, is employees want a trusted advisor, right? They want to know, if you go back 15, 20 years ago, everybody knew who their HR person was. They had a great relationship. It was like a 20-to-1, right? There was an HR person for maybe 20 employees, maybe 50, but they knew them all. And if they had a question on their benefits, they walked into that HR person's office and they said, hey, help me with this. I don't understand the difference between these two options, whether that be health insurance, dental insurance, or something else. How much life insurance should I buy for my family and I? And so now I think there is an increasing need for managers to be more fluid and flexible and understanding of what the benefits are. And in no way am I saying that they need to be able to be an insurance advisor and tell people exactly what they need, but they need to know where to direct people and how to help them get access to the information that they're looking for. And I think that is so important. I do think also that offering financial wellness components in the workplace will be more important than ever. And if you think about things like seminars that employers used to offer, they traditionally did them in person. And so the attendance may be limited by someone who has a conflict of that 1 hour of their day or couldn't be in the office that day for whatever reason. And now being able to go to a virtual environment where those sessions can be offered multiple times a day. They can be online on demand, so folks can go back and review them afterwards. That gives me a lot of hope that more people will get access to financial information that they may not have had before and be able to make some more critical decisions about how to handle their own wealth or lack thereof, as Peter talked about, and just being able to move from one facet to the other. And no longer is it employee and I'm a home person. Right now, your worlds are coming closer together. And I think that's really key for employees and employers. I think there's a great opportunity in front of all of us.
Yeah. I mean, we definitely are seeing the workplace change in pretty significant ways. Liam, let me go to you. So you had explained how Ladder is a life insurtech that's really testing new ways of protecting consumers by the way that you acquire customers, underwrite, and the whole experience. How are you able to better offer flexibility, and just speak a little bit more about how you can reach more customers through your approach?
Yeah, so well, first of all, we feel like we can reach a really wide range of customers. We offer coverage from $100,000 all the way up to $8 million. So right there, we're able to really engage with a broad variety of customers and offer them the same great experience. And Ladder is flexible in many ways, but I'll highlight two key ones that I think are pretty important, just to give you that context. So the first is really about just folks being able to access life insurance anywhere. So we see actually a lot of our engagement happening outside of office hours, the traditional office hours anyway. So we can allow folks to access, our product 24/7, 365. So when they need it, they can get it. And that's pretty huge in closing the coverage gap that we see with a lot of those families I mentioned before. So that's the first key one, is just being available. That alone is allows people to, the flexibility to engage with it when they can actually get it done. The second key thing that we have is a really cool feature we call laddering. So that allows the customer, they can apply for more coverage when they need it, or they can lower their coverage at the touch of a button in their account page. So when they lower their coverage, their payments simply drop in the same proportion. So for example, if you halve your coverage, you cut your payments in half. And that sounds, pretty obvious and pretty intuitive, but in fact that we were the first to introduce it in this instant fashion. So that kind of flexibility allows, make sure that the customer has their coverage that fits like a glove when their financial picture changes. And so, if folks are experiencing tough times, especially, during the pandemic, it's easy for them to keep some of their coverage in place and reduce payments so that it becomes something a lot more manageable for them, rather than simply having their coverage lapse and having nothing at all. And it sounds really obvious, but it's actually something that is not common in the industry, where there are policy fees, it makes it very difficult for the customer to adjust their coverage. So often you would either pay us in full or cancel, and those are the only options. So the way we offer this is just an example of how we're able to be really flexible. And at the end of the day, it's also, what Dan was saying as well, is it's about putting the customer in control. So giving them the tools to be able to adapt and change as their circumstances change is really, really powerful, not only in attracting customers, but also just in providing them the solution that meets their needs. So again, it goes back to about putting that customer in control.
I have two quick follow-up questions on that, because that is really interesting about being able to decrease or increase coverage. So you gave the example of decreasing coverage, where then your payments just simply are reduced. How does it work when you increase coverage? Because in a normal life insurance policy, increasing coverage requires a whole new underwriting process. It's actually quite complex. You can't just say, oh, I want to add $100,000 to my policy. So how do you handle those who want to increase? And then related to that, what I hear a lot in the industry around all of these life insurtechs like Ladder and others that are really innovating around underwriting, mainly through not requiring medical exam, liquids, all of those things, is a bit of skepticism about, will this underwriting technique hold true 10, 20, 30 years down the line? I'm sure you have some really interesting thoughts on that, since you lead, you're the chief actuary at Ladder. So can you just comment briefly on those 2 points? I know those are big questions, but just briefly.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So how we handle increase. So I was very careful about the wording there, where I say you can apply for more, right? So there's no guarantee that you'll be accepted. And the reason why we don't do that is because that's an option that would have to price and increase the price. So we want to make it as affordable for anyone. But what we do, a lot of the innovation and the power of Ladder is really under the hood. It's a lot of it in the underwriting tech that we've built. So if we're able to gather data that allows us to instantly offer that increase, we'll do that. And so we have incredibly, I don't want to give away the exact number, but we have many different underwriting paths that we can put a customer through. So we can reuse information that's fresh. We can collect only the information that we need. We can decide we have enough and instantly issue. So in order for us to keep the pricing affordable, and that's one of the key tenets of making it accessible, we need to be able to be very flexible in how we underwrite folks. So when someone has a need, we're able to offer them that coverage pretty easily, and in a very different way than having to put them through everything all over again. So that's sort of the quick answer to that is we have very flexible underwriting that allows us to get just what we need. The second piece of it is talking about kind of underwriting skepticism. So, we have, again, many different underwriting paths that we're able to put the customer through. So I'll give you an example of innovation that we've been able to bring to the customers. So when we collect data on customers that allow us to underwrite instantly, we may find that we don't have enough information to offer a customer an instant offer right away. What we do there is one example of what we can do is we actually have mail-in saliva test kits that we allow folks to use at home. So if you think of something like 23andMe or even a Warby Parker, where you can try on your glasses at home, we have the ability for folks to collect their own sample and mail that back into us. So we have different ways that we're able to collect more information when we need it. And that all goes back to how do we make the customer experience great? How do we keep that NPS high? But importantly, how do we also keep that price affordable for customers?
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's great. Peter, let me turn to you. So as you mentioned, you work on AXA's emerging customers team, serving very low income populations in the developing world and emerging markets. And a lot of people with strapped incomes, whether they live here in the US or in other countries, often assume that they can't afford insurance, even though they know, and research has shown again and again that they know it's important and it's a critical tool. And sometimes insurers, on the flip side, also think that they can't profitably offer insurance to low-income populations. So how have you overcome this barrier in your work?
Yeah, well, I just have to say first, I'm loving how revolutionary the ideas from Ladder and Metro Mile are. They shouldn't be revolutionary, but in our industry they are. You use less, you pay less. You want more, you up your premium and pay more. These should not be as revolutionary as they are, and I'm grateful for the Ladders and Metro Miles, and obviously the innovations MetLife is doing as well. We really find, as I mentioned before, that in this emerging customer space, this landscape in Latin America, Africa, Asia, where we operate, but also it applies to low-income environments in the US and in Europe, where risk is so prevalent. We're finding that we have to operate in a customer-centric way to get access to the customer in the first place. I have, I think, 3 credit cards, and I did a count about a year ago on the number of insurance policies I have on those credit cards. I think it was like 27. I have 27 insurance policies on 3 credit cards. I only found out I had those policies because I went looking, and then when I went to find how much I'm paying for them, what the terms are, and how to make a claim, I could find nothing. The click paths were circular, the phone numbers didn't answer, the emails went unanswered. This isn't insurance, this is theft. This is not a service that's being provided. This is just people making money in the dark, and we're to blame for it, and the banks are to blame for it. And so, we can't grow in a new market that way. And so that's what Ladder and Metro Mile and MetLife and us are confident about. And so, our way of doing this in AXA is to say, we're actually sitting on a gold mine here. The idea that you can be protected from risks you face, if you buy this product, is an incredible idea. And so let's not hide that under a stack of paperwork and keep people away from that product. Let's instead use the emotional resonance of risks that low-income customers face every day to partner with major brands globally and say, make this promise of protection from risk at the heart of your brand promise to your customers. And so in my career in 10 years, I've been involved in products reaching out to more than 60 million customers with their first ever insurance policies. And this is because we put insurance effectively as a marketing tool, saying, if you will be more loyal, if you will, maybe spend a little bit more with our brand than the competitor, then we'll reward you with an insurance policy that's not hidden again under all the terms and conditions, but rather is right out in front of why you might engage with that brand in the first place. And so then that means that we, as an insurer, have a responsibility to have a simple product that pays in seconds, not in weeks, and all the other things that you expect from any product that you buy. And when we're able to do that and give people that first experience of insurance, they say, this is great, and they tell their whole communities about it. I've seen, there was a village in West Africa, or a small town in West Africa, that hired coaches, buses, to bring the entire adult population to the nearest town to sign up for the insurance policy after they saw that it worked out. People do have money to spend on products they value. Our job in the insurance industry is to show them why they should value us. And that's what we're doing at AXA.
Yeah, that's really inspiring. And you have been leading the way, especially in your work overseas, around how to effectively bundle insurance onto products that people are already using, but in a way that's very transparent. I mean, I think we can all relate to the image that you shared of, stepping up to the car rental counter. They ask you, do you want to buy the protection, the insurance? And you're like, does my credit card cover it? Should I pay? And it's just so confusing. It's very, very unclear. So, we're living through a unique time right now, not just because of COVID, but also because of recent racial unrest that has brought to the fore yet again the severe racial injustices that exist in our country. And so I'm curious to hear what this time is teaching the industry about the importance and viability of better serving customers from all segments of society in a more inclusive way. And Dan, I'm particularly interested in your thoughts on this because, car insurance has a very bad history of discrimination in its underwriting. And you mentioned the ways that underwriting is usually done, which it uses proxies that are not necessarily tied to risk. So I'm particularly interested in your thoughts because I think Metromile is really is a great solution to some of these racial disparities.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm really glad you asked the question. We've actually been talking about this a lot as a company, especially in the last several weeks. And yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. A lot of the variables that are used right now to price insurance are likely not fair. And the number of states have gotten rid of things like credit and others, and California is in that bucket. Mm-hmm. And I expect that that's going to continue. My hope is that we'll see continued adoption of more and more like behavioral-based insurance, like this use of sensor data as a way to do that, because it's a far better reflection of what the true risk is. Even so doing, though, you still need to be careful in the ways that you ultimately define what those are. And so we have a number of ongoing questions as a company about how do we best define the things that ultimately determine what we believe is the risk that then ultimately comes up with the price in the end. And so, I believe that over time, we'll be able to get rid of the vast majority of the kinds of variables that you're referencing, things like credit or whatever they might be, that can be discriminatory. And so, I think there's a really important role for insurers across every line of insurance to do a better job here. And I think the technology now actually makes that a lot more possible, where you can still create a competitive dynamic in the market, but by using data and other ways of measuring that in ways that are far more within the customer's control. And so, yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with it promise more.
Yeah, that's great. So we only have a few minutes left, so I want to ask one last question to each of the panelists. Again, the current environment has really forced a lot of quick adjustments among insurers. Companies that have been talking about going digital for years have now really been forced to do so in weeks. So you kind of wonder why it took years. But I'm interested just in kind of some closing thoughts from each of you. What are some of the changes coming from these current circumstances that actually may have the silver lining of improving aspects of the insurance industry, ways that the industry can serve customers better going forward? So I think in general, my question is, what are you encouraged by as you look at your peers in the industry, really from a customer lens? Liam, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I think that there's a myth in the life insurance industry that life insurance is sold and not bought. And I think Ladder exists and thrives as a proof that is a myth. And so, it's about, for us, it's about having that deep customer empathy. You get to build that trust with the customer. You get to offer them something, directly to them that allows them to be in control. And, we have the opportunity to actually delight the customer by having a great experience. So, when we look at it, the real hard work is not about kind of putting on a shiny front end or a nice website. The real hard work is all under the hood. It's about doing the underwriting correctly, being fair, being equitable, making sure that you're making the right kind of underwriting decisions, building in that flexibility so that when customers have things that happen in their lives, you can adapt to them, meeting them where they are, on their phones, ready to transact any time of the day. Those are the things that are incredibly difficult and really hard work. And we started those, well before COVID-19 hit, because now as an industry, we've got to work even harder than ever to make sure that those 50 million families have the coverage they need. And so I think about, it goes back to really listening to people, having that customer empathy, and then solving real customer problems. So I think as an industry where we could sort of get by on doing the things we've done, now we have to really get back in touch with that customer and help them do what they need to do.
Yeah, great. Jen, how about you? What do you see as some of the silver linings for ways we can better serve customers?
Yeah, so as Liam was speaking, it reminded me of something that we're launching soon, which is our digital will program. And when you think about the pandemic and financial health and resiliency, estate planning is so important to have that will if something were to happen to you. And so very similar, obviously completely different products, right? A will versus life insurance, but we'll have a full digital offering where someone can get a notary digitally. You can do the entire thing on your phone if you want, or on your iPad or your computer. We were pleased to offer this to healthcare workers across the country as our first pilot. It will be included in our MetLife Legal Plans program going forward, but we had some phenomenal stories from some of our frontline heroes. An individual that stuck out to me was a woman who wrote in saying both her and her husband are physicians in New York City. They have a 3-year-old. And being able to go through this process and create a will for both her and her husband put such a peace of mind for them if something were to happen to both of them while they were exposed to COVID in such a dramatic way in the March and April timeframe, just gave such a peace of mind. And I think absolutely, as folks have talked about, it's about the end consumer. How do they access information? How quickly can they do what they need to do? What does that experience feel like? And can they walk away with something that they value? And so I'm very excited about that and some of the other digital enhancements I've seen MetLife and our peers make too. I think will just improve the overall industry. And again, insurance is always the bad guy, right? And we've got a lot of black clouds hanging above our heads, but I think we're doing the right things and taking the right steps to improve that for consumers and just to provide more transparency.
Yeah, that's great. Dan?
Yeah, I think change tends to be driven by customers and what they're demanding from their insurance companies. And I think if there's a silver lining, or maybe a couple from these last few months, both the demand from customers to get flexible products, to be able to meet their actual needs now in the way that they now move around or see risk in different ways or whatever that might be, is going to drive, I think, all insurers to go and rethink the way that they structure their products. And I think it's going to be a really meaningful long-term benefit. And the more recent kind of elevation of the importance of racial justice and disparity, I think is also going to force a lot of insurers to think differently about how they structure their products. And so, my hope is that insurers will be responsive to those needs. And I think they will, because there's enough competition and new companies coming out that change will happen. So I'm feeling hopeful about those ultimate changes. I think it's really hard right now, but I'm hopeful that there will be a number of changes that for the long term that can really help people.
Yeah, it's often the long game. Peter, we have just a minute left. How about from your perspective, what makes you hopeful as you look around at the industry?
Yeah, AXA is on a big campaign to move from payer to partner, to be really aligned with our customer base, to help them not just have financial payments when there's a risk that materializes, but to help them prepare for, be better educated, be better prepared overall. So our big change right now is moving toward telemedicine in a big way. In emerging markets alone, we've launched 10 telemedicine programs from scratch since COVID started that serve currently 600,000 people, and will grow to 1.5 million in the next year. And that really moves not just telemedicine service forward, but it allows people to be safer, not exposed to health facilities when they don't need to be, and increase access to healthcare at a lower cost. And so that's been a change that's been, again, waiting for a long time, and we're moving ahead rapidly with that now.
That's great. Fantastic. Well, I think Jen said it best that, insurance is really all about peace of mind, and it's about providing resilience when an inevitable shock comes up in someone's life. So I think we've learned a lot from all of your experiences. With that, we need to close. I want to thank you to our panelists for sharing their insights today, to our audience for your engagement. Thanks so much.
Hi, everyone. This is Laura Barger, Chief Marketing Officer at the Financial Health Network. And thanks so much for joining us today for our session on the realities of facing a midlife financial crisis. As we've been talking about earlier today, the realities of building and maintaining resilience takes on a lot of forms. And in the sessions earlier today, where we spoke to our friends over at JP Morgan Chase and the AARP Foundation, one of the areas that we have really been focused on in our research and work has been the situations for aging Americans as they face instability, unemployment, the need for reskilling, and so forth. And so for today's conversation, I am really pleased to be introducing Ray Suarez, who is a writer who has 30 plus years, 3 published books, high profile jobs at PBS, NPR, CNN, and Al Jazeera America. Ray, thanks for joining us. And I just wanted to point out that this conversation is particularly timely because you actually penned a piece in the Washington Post in April talking about your own personal situation facing some income instability, particularly with your work as a freelance journalist. We have posted a link to that piece in our chat box for anyone who is viewing. So if folks haven't read it, please go ahead. It's a very raw and personal account. But I would love to just have you take a moment to introduce yourself and give us a sense of what factors were at play when you had to write that piece, and what were some of the things that really stood out to you at the time that compelled you to write the article.
Well, I was wool gathering, as you do, for a piece on what was facing older workers in the job market. And as I started to pull things together, I really had to think hard about whether to keep my own story out of what I was writing, or just whether that elephant in the room was just too big for it to be an honest portrayal of what older workers are going through without saying, oh, by the way, here's why I'm writing this. I'm feeling the hot flames licking at the back of my neck, and I can't outrun this thing. Ageism is real. What happens to incomes and what happens to job security after 55 is real. And I had done a lot of things that I thought were going to insure me against facing that kind of instability. So I did all the things that you might see on the cover story of Money magazine with some very happy over 50 guy about to step into his boat on the cover of the magazine. I don't have a boat, but I mean, the kinds of advice that they gave you. And I paid off my mortgages early, and I saved a very high percentage of my income, and I lived below my means, and I did all those things and had a retirement time in mind. And I'm well short of it. I'm well short of my Social Security retirement age. I'm well short of when the few defined benefit programs that I've been in from various employers over the years will have fully matured to their full payment. So, and I'm well short of where I was at physically wanted to be when I retired. So the idea that in a country where they're constantly telling you, you're going to have to work longer, you're going to have to work longer. And I say, I want to work longer and I can't find a job. And the length of time past 60 that you spend looking for work lengthens the older you get. The amount that you have to be ready to countenance in a pay cut expands with every year you age over the age of 60. That trend starts after 50, really deepens after 55, and then, you're looking at upwards of 35% declines in your income when you get a new job after 65. So, and along with all that, there's the sort of mental and emotional rearranging you have to do in yourself. Is this new status the new you, or is it just a bad patch? Is it just this period and you'll get over it and you'll be back to the person you were before? That's sort of the software of all this. The figures and the facts and what a pay stub looks like is the hardware. But then there's also, am I that person who has to scramble for work? Am I that person who has very little bargaining power on that side, on my side of the table, because I have been out of full-time work for a while? So there's all kinds of things that are changing. Some of them are interior and mean you have to get used to a new state of play for yourself. Some of them are sort of the things that millions of men like you are going through at the same time. So I put it down on paper and the Washington Post said, oh, yes, absolutely. And we were off.
Yeah, I want to kind of click in on one thing that you said that I thought was actually really interesting. I think there's a lot of conversation about circumstantial, right? Things that happen circumstantially. And then there's things that are truly systemic, right? And I think that what I'd be interested in hearing is that given that you have worked for a long time in the freelance space, what do you think that you faced that might have been a bit unique versus somebody who might have been working in corporate positions all along and sort of moving from those types of jobs to those types of jobs? I'd just be interested to hear, your reflection on that.
In my life, as a broadcaster, as a writer, as a communicator, I've also made a lot of money on the lecture circuit over the years. Actually, I paid for my two older kids' college educations with that kind of moonlighting. We had the conversation about branding long before everybody else did. When I finally started to see it in general interest publications, like manage yourself like you're a brand, people in my line of work have been doing that for decades. I thought that I had created brand value, which would ensure me, build in bumpers around me so that the same kind of things that are happening to a lot of men my age wouldn't happen. And it was a striking and sobering set of circumstances when I finally started to come up against the realities of being in a line of work where there are far more entrants than there are functions to fulfill. There are far more people trying to do the work than there is work to do, which anybody who's taken Economics 101 knows that bids down the cost of labor. And it's bid down the cost of labor, even in very brand-focused lines of work like my own. So there's only so much as an individual that you can do to ensure against that happening, because you have no control over the wider marketplace. And that was that caught me up short, I have to admit.
I thought it was interesting in your article too, that you talked a bit, you got into the idea of what the sort of waterfall effect was, that all of a sudden you were forced to make some decisions around things like healthcare and what you were going to prioritize. And it feels like, given your personal situation, you probably have more empathy than most on that, but it does feel like a theme that we see a lot in our research, where folks that are facing this type of income instability are then forced to make a series of decisions that they might not have had to consider. Can you give us a few examples of where you might have had to face that?
Well, we've created this world of employment where some of the really important basics of life are very intimately connected to being in full-time employment, whether it's retirement planning, having health insurance, having life insurance. Millions of American workers get those things through their employers and associate those things and the acquisition of them with being employed. When you enter this big amorphous monster called the gig economy, you are now providing them for yourself. You're paying the payroll taxes, the self-employment taxes that act as a proxy for retirement planning. You may have a SEP IRA, so you're doing that for yourself instead of having an employer provide a 401k. And you're also now, thanks to the Affordable Care Act, more easily able to wade into a marketplace of sorts and buy health insurance. And after COBRA from my last full-time job ran out, my wife and I had a conversation about buying health insurance and the premium plus for dental care, to have dental care wrapped into the policy. And we looked over what we had spent on dental care in recent years and thought, okay, we can probably do without the $180 a month extra that dental care was going to be on the Affordable Care Act plan. And then I went out for a long bike ride, like just a couple of weeks later. And my front wheel went into this enormous pothole that I didn't see because I was riding in traffic and keeping my eye on where the cars were. And the force of the whole front of the bike going into this hole slammed my lower jaw up against my upper jaw. And it hurt a little bit, but I kept on riding and I didn't have a flat tire, so I just kept on riding. But then by a few minutes later, my jaw started to pulse. And then in the rhythm of the beating of your heart, you could feel the swelling coming in your jaw. And I thought, oh man, just a couple of weeks ago, I dropped dental coverage. I had done something to my mouth, but I was really afraid because I thought, oh, it's going to be thousands of dollars. I'm going to go in and find out I need a new crown or I've cracked a tooth or something. So like a lot of people without health insurance or a lot of people who are underinsured, I just waited it out to see whether this could rectify itself. Took a couple of extra strength Tylenol and waited 2 weeks till I could eat properly again, till I could align my jaw properly again and comfortably. And wow, I had dodged a bullet, but also in that same moment, I had become the kind of person that I used to do stories about during the debate over the Affordable Care Act. Instead of covering those people who were deferring health care because they were afraid of the cost, I now was one. And that was one of those shock of self-recognition moments where you think, oh my God, I just never thought.
Yeah.
It's not that I didn't think it could ever happen to me. I'm not Superman. I just didn't think about it happening to me because for most of my adult life, I've had employer-provided health insurance, and that's just been that. But here I was in the boat that I used to tell stories about, and that was quite a sobering moment.
Yeah, I would say that's one of the things that really stood out to me, right? I think there's a lot of tension between, we're both communicators, right? There's a lot of tension between what is being reported on and what is sort of being compiled as a set of data, facts, and figures, and what the real stories are, because they are so unique and specific, but really have a common thread. So I appreciate that, and certainly appreciate the story. Hope your jaw is feeling better. It certainly seems to be.
I'm fine now, but it was a little scary. It was a little scary.
I bet.
And just, it gave it that extra,
reality
because
check.
we had just dropped the dental to try to lower the costs. And here I was, I really needed to see what was wrong with my mouth.
Right. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit. I guess if you can call it that, to where we are now. And we're essentially facing a kind of a crisis within a crisis where stimulus payments are starting to expire. There's a growing recognition of significant racial disparities in individuals' financial health and access to employment and solutions. From the research that we have just done with AARP Foundation, for example, we know that older workers, and particularly workers of color, finding work is especially difficult. Like older African American men are twice as likely to be unemployed than our white counterparts, especially during a time of a downturn. I know, again, you've written about these types of disparities before, but I'd love your thoughts on sort of what you think about this moment in time and whether you see this as an opportunity for a sea change, and if some of the conversations that you're seeing or the actions that you're seeing might hint that there is going to be change, particularly for this type of un or underemployment. But I'd love to get your thoughts on that. What are we doing well? What needs to be addressed?
I go back and forth on this.
Mm-hmm.
I think, oh, well, this is either the kind of catalyst moment that provokes change, or that because it's such a near-death experience for so many people, they'll just say, oh, thank God that's over, as things inch back toward normal. And we just shut that away and not talk about what just happened. It's entirely possible that over this past couple of months, this past 12 to 16 weeks, that careers were ended, that work lives were ended, that as businesses begin to hire up again, they'll take the path of least resistance and favor younger workers. They'll take older workers who had staff jobs with a full slate of benefits and convert their work to contingent labor. The real test, the interesting test, will be what proceeds from this, whether Americans have had in career terms, in financial terms, that kind of near-death experience that leaves them more open to a more thorough addressing of the structural problems in the world of work that this crisis has laid bare for everybody to see. For younger people, it's going to take longer to get traction on their work lives. It's a barbell problem. It's not just an old people problem or just a young people problem. It's going to take them, it was already taking them longer to hit some of the mileposts in adult life. We have to reimagine what the 20s may look like. More flexible opportunities for employment and training, different expectations around housing, around family creation, pairing, childbirth. Sometimes you get to make these changes on a timetable of your own choosing. And sometimes you have the timetable forced on you by events. And this may be one of those moments where we have no choice but to examine some of the real structural problems that were laid bare by the pandemic.
I think that's a really good point. I also refer back to a session earlier today where we were talking about, obviously, the conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion have been particularly poignant, but it also needs to include ageism, right, as you brought into the focus. And so just to push a little further on sort of like what to do, right, as we're getting to see these organizations that are setting up task forces for inclusion practices, do you see ensuring that sort of older Americans have reskilling or job entry opportunities as something that organizations should be doing more formally? Or do you see that if there's any other place in the system, whether it's policy, institutions, that can help push this along the way to a little bit more formalization?
The last 40 years since the Carter-Reagan election have been ones where we've evolved a you're on your own attitude toward providing for people in later life. And sometimes in the face of rapidly changing circumstances, you're on your own starts to become apparently unthinkable. You know, it's not hard to find articles, addresses by CEOs at big national conferences where they gush, where they extol the gig economy and the movement of more people into the contingent labor force, because they say it adds flexibility for both employer and employee. You can set your own hours, you can decide your own needs, blah, blah, blah. But we never evolved a set of institutional responses to that very large change in the way of work for millions of Americans. So as I said earlier, with retirement planning, with health insurance, with disability insurance and unemployment insurance, so packed in and packed around steady staff employment at an enterprise, we haven't yet fully institutionally reckoned with what it means to have millions more people working for themselves or just working for you occasionally. And you're on your own just is going to be shown for the empty, vacant, bankrupt approach that it really is now that people my age, I was born in the year of the 20th century where more Americans were born than any other single year. And we are now going to crash onto America like a tidal wave of old people. And we haven't answered questions about long-term care, about nursing facilities, about the cost, about having to bankrupt yourself before you qualify for government assistance, all these things. As long as there was full employment, as long as wages were rising, creeping up a little bit, we could paper over some of these things. But now that we're looking at ignored and unaddressed problems in the structure of Medicare and Social Security, that because of our political paralysis, we haven't been able to address, we're going to have solutions forced on us by the ossification of our politics. And there are already smart, strategically thinking organizational leaders who say, look, we can't continue to do what we've been doing as a permanent state of being going forward. It's going to leave too many problems unaddressed. So I'm a little older than you. I'm going to be like flopping like a fish on the pier. Your responsibility. Do you want that? No, I don't want you to be your responsibility either. If someone, we've handed to workers the responsibility for getting ready for being old. We did it. Over the course of a generation, we moved out of defined benefit into self-prepared retirement. But not everybody can do it. Not everybody can do it well. And some build in assumptions that look like smart assumptions when they're doing it. And then when they actually turn 70, long before they ever thought they would, they need, for instance, full-time at-home care. And they run through all the money that they saved in a fairly short period of time. We have very little answer for that, except you're on your own and sucks to be you. And those aren't real answers. We're going to see in the coming years whether we really have each other's backs or not.
Yeah.
I'm afraid that we might not. I hope that we do.
I can't agree more. I think also you made a really good point kind of right at the end there that talks about this kind of continuity of care, because, obviously if we have a generation that is requiring care, it's the caregivers also knocking at the door of their own kind of middle age that are also experiencing significant unemployment or underemployment because
huge,
often
big COVID, a crisis exposed by COVID, the at-home care workforce, such as it is.
Right.
Many left unemployed, many with old people's kids calling from 1,000 miles away, telling you not to go to their parents' house anymore. Suddenly, in the space of a week after 5 years, you have no work.
Right.
Or employers are telling you, well, I don't want you going on the subway, and I don't want you going home to your spouse and kids because they're out in the world. Who knows what you could be bringing to me? And offering their at-home staff, in effect, you either move in with me or you don't work for me anymore.
Right.
I mean, and these are some of the lowest paid workers in our society. And we ask them for a lot and we expect a lot. And yet we've made very little provision for their training, very little provision for their protection as workers. It's a remarkable, remarkable moment.
Yeah, I would agree. So we have about 10 minutes left. I have a couple more questions. I would obviously encourage anyone who is watching, if you have questions for Ray or on this topic, please let us know. We might have some time to address. But we're now in June. And I just want to get a sense from you how things are going. And also, what has changed? You're in New York, and I think that you're seeing, obviously, the effect of New York slowly starting to open up. But would just love to get a sense of what are you seeing out there? Are you starting to see your own personal employment opportunities or income opportunities change? Why or why not? And sort of what do you see ahead of you for the next 6 to 12 months?
Well, because of the peculiarities of the kind of work I do, I have some real choices to make in the coming weeks. I have an assignment that will take me on the road in Montana for a week of reporting. I have an assignment that will take me on the road for a week of reporting in Georgia. Both Georgia and Montana have rapidly rising numbers of COVID-19 cases. Do I go? Do I get on a plane? United Airlines has a direct flight to Billings from Washington. It's easy enough for me to get to it. Do I take that plane? Or do I say, well, I'm in the over 60 risk category for having a really bad case. If I did catch it, maybe I shouldn't go at all. Well, it's significant chunks of change we're talking about.
Mm.
Do
and
I
it
just
feels like a
forego
choice.
that, or do I take, some might describe it dramatically and say, do I take my life in my hands and go to Montana and report from Indian reservations where, in fact, Indian reservations have been hotspots for the disease. So there's that kind of thing.
Right. Well, it sort of feels like the lesser of two risks, right? But it does occur to me, from your story, that you're sort of forced into that. It is a structural blockage because there is no way to sit and feel protected and secure. You are forced to personally make decisions about your own health and safety. And I think that's something we're seeing pretty consistently with vulnerable communities, wherever you are.
Sure.
So I can
at the risk of stating the obvious, if I worked for an employer and I couldn't go somewhere, my check would still come in 2 weeks and my insurance would still be paid for and all of those things would be covered. And my employer, I've worked in the news business a long time, he'd find something else or she'd find something else for me to do. Here's a case where if I don't go do this, no money, period.
Right.
It's not flexible in that same way. They want me to do this. They've signed a contract with me to do this, and that's it. So it's a tough spot to be in.
Yeah, I understand that. So I want to shift a little bit to looking ahead, and not to try to end on a totally optimistic note, but there's always this saying that, great innovation can grow out of despair or crisis. I'd be curious to get your perspective, especially since you've been writing on this for a while. We talked about this a little bit, what does the sea change, but what are really the opportunities for various institutions to make change? And I mean institutions, whether it's the private sector, whether it's policy and so forth, we can start anywhere. But where do you see, if you kind of had your ability to wave a wand, what would be the things that we'd be focusing on so that if and possibly when we face these types of economic crises again, or health crises, it doesn't end up being in the same magnitude?
Well, I think we have to address the institutional, organizational, structural shortcomings of gig work. If we're resigned to the fact that millions of Americans are going to do it as a regular way of life and as a mode of existence, we have to make sure that the kind of scaffolding that exists around a worker who works for an enterprise exists or can exist around you when you are the enterprise. It's not easy for reasons that are legion, but if this is the way if this is the way we're going to work in the future, then we have to have some sort of answer to it. If we're going to tell workers that they have to work longer because they're going to live longer, we have to start talking honestly about what ageism is doing to shape the workforce and what job insecurity past 60 really means to that workforce. If you've got people in the last couple of years of preparation before they begin a time in their life when they're not generating as much income, we're going to have a large, comprehensive settlement of the long-term finances of our old age protection programs, Medicare and Social Security. We really have no choice. If we are looking at, and we are, millions of newly poor Americans entering their late 60s and early 70s in the coming years, who are no longer able to generate the same kind of income, many of whom, because of the long tail consequences of the 2008 recession, are still going to be paying mortgages into their 70s. We can't pretend that there's both a ready pool of buyers to buy those properties so they can downshift into more affordable places, and that will be enough money for them to cover their Social Security shortfall, and that they will be able to provide for themselves as they are living now much more regularly into their 90s. The fastest growing age cohort of Americans is people in their 80s. Well, some people in their 80s are self-sufficient, self-reliant, able to cover all their bases and do the things they need to get through the day, and millions more are not going to be. And we have no comprehensive answer for that as well. We are now becoming a can't-do people. Our politics are so frozen, the gears are so jammed that all of the big challenges that we have to talk about, we are ducking instead and finding some half-a-loaf solution that papers over the problems until we can get down the road and leave it for another cohort of elected leaders and voters to take care of. We can't keep on doing that. And so something's going to have to give. This can't go on. Can't. And it's not that long until we go to 75 cents on a dollar in Social Security. And we're acting like, they'll take care of it down the road. But that's tens of millions of us. And for people in their middle age and their middle working years, that's your parents. That's your parents that's going to happen to. So we ought to get serious about it.
Well, I agree. And before we wrap for the day, Ray, I just want to ask, what's next for you? Are you writing a book? Do you have some things? Okay, let's talk about it a little bit.
Roughly 2044, 2045, America passes a threshold when a majority of us will trace our ancestry to Africa, Asia, or Latin America rather than to Europe for the first time ever in the life of the United States as a nation. 2018 was the first year in which a majority of Americans under 16 were not of European ancestry. Those people will be our college students momentarily, our military officers in a few years, our business startup people in a few years. They will be paying the bulk of employment taxes and payroll taxes that finance all these programs that we've been talking about. They are really important. And if we've shown anything in the last couple of years, it's that we haven't really reckoned with what that will mean for the United States to be still a European descended plurality country, but not a majority. And if you've got people walking with torches around statues of Robert E. Lee chanting, "You will not replace us," there's obviously some anxiety that a lot of Americans feel and some uncertainty about what that country is going to be like. That's what I'm writing a book about now.
Well, we'll certainly have to have you back for that. That sounds amazing. All right, Ray. Well, I really appreciate your coming on and sharing your story with us. It was a perfect part of today's content, and I wish you all the best of luck and hope that we can stay in touch.
Thank you. Thanks for having me with you.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for day 4 of Emerge Live. I hope that everyone found today's focus on rebuilding resilience engaging. As we wrap for today, I'm joined by my colleague, Sarah Parker, a Senior Director of Programs at the Financial Health Network. Sarah, you moderated a terrific insurance session today, but you've also been deeply, deeply involved in the work we've done with the AARP Foundation and JP Morgan. So thank you for agreeing to come on and share what really stood out to you today. So I'd love to just hear from you. What did you hear today that inspired you, maybe surprised you, or things that you are going to really start thinking about as we close out the day?
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, I had 3 main takeaways from the day. It was all really amazing content. The first is, during the first session, Lisa from AARP Foundation talked about how so many of the older adults we profiled in our video series did everything right to the best of their abilities, and they still felt responsible for their struggles. We heard it just now from Ray as well. He did all the right things, but he rightly said that there's only so much an individual can control. So for me, that really highlights the systemic issues that exist in our country and the ways we're not supporting people to be resilient as they age, and all the challenges and vulnerabilities that come with that. And of course, these issues are all the more important in light of COVID. Secondly, I found the insurance panel was such a breath of fresh air about the unique role insurance plays and how it really should be the easiest product in the world to offer people. For people who are always managing risk, products that provide peace of mind and resilience during a shock is a critical financial health tool. So I'm really hopeful that the current circumstances of the pandemic is pushing for real change in the industry along the lines of what the panelists shared. And then finally, my final takeaway was really a sense of optimism in the resilience of struggling Americans. People somehow find a way. And I think that should inspire the financial services industry, employers, government, all types of stakeholders to do the right thing, walk beside people, and work with them to build their resilience.
Those are all really good points. Thank you so much. And thanks again to today's speakers, and of course to all of our sponsors for helping us create a day full of thought-provoking content. So we'll be back here tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for our final day of sessions, and these will be focused on looking ahead to a truly integrated financial health system. We hope to see you then. Thanks so much.